way, he said, just 2 words. Calm, quiet. Almost like he was asking them to pass the salt. But every single person inside that bar went completely still, because something in his voice, something ancient and certain, told them that if those men didn't walk out that door right now, they were never going to walk out at all. And he was. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end, because I promise you, you have never heard anything like this before. A comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. Now let's get into it. There's a specific kind of silence that belongs only to Montana. Not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning, not the comfortable silence of a house where everyone is sleeping safely. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that stretches across open land like a warning. The kind that reminds you how far you are from everything. How far you are from help. How far from anyone who might hear you scream. That silence lived along Route 12, where the road bent north through the foothills, and the wind came down from the mountains, carrying nothing but cold air and the smell of pine and diesel fuel. Most people drove through that stretch of highway without ever stopping. There was nothing out there worth stopping for, or so they thought. Most people were wrong, because sitting just off the shoulder of that highway, a gravel lot full of potholes and a hand-painted sign that had been weathered down to almost nothing, was a building that had been standing in some form or another since 1962, the Broken Spur Roadhouse. It wasn't much to look at. The outside wood had gone gray from decades of Montana winters. The neon beer signs in the window buzzed and flickered at random. The parking lot gravel needed replacing every spring, and every spring the owner told himself he'd get around to it. He never did. The picnic tables out front leaned at angles that suggested they were tired of being picnic tables and were slowly trying to become something else. Inside the Broken Spur, it was something completely different. Not beautiful, not fancy, but alive in the way that only certain places get to be alive, places that have absorbed decades of human experience into their walls and their floors and their wooden countertops. Places where enough real things have happened that the building itself seems to carry a kind of weight. Dalton had owned the place for 31 years. He was 67 years old, and he moved the way 67 feels when he spent 3 decades hauling kegs and fixing plumbing and staying up until 2 in the morning to make sure everybody got home safe. He had the thick, capable hands of a man who knew how to build things and fix things and hold things together through sheer stubbornness. His hair had gone completely white sometime in his late 50s, and he had decided he liked it that way. It suited him. Frank had raised 2 kids inside that building, made a wife, and kept going. He had survived 3 economic recessions and 1 near bankruptcy and a fire in the kitchen that took out the back wall and 6 months of savings. He had kept the lights on through all of it. He was not the kind of man who quit. And the Roadhouse was not just a business to him. It was what he had left. It was his proof of something. He couldn't have told you exactly what something about being here, about still being here, about enduring. He knew every crack in the floor. He knew which bar stool wobbled on cold mornings. He knew that the third tap from the left poured slightly faster than the others, and that if you didn't account for it, you'd overfill the glass. He knew every person who walked through his door by name, and he knew their coffee orders before they sat down, and he knew which ones were having hard weeks, and which ones needed to talk, and which ones just needed someone to be quiet next to them for an hour. That was Frank Dalton. And then there was Cole. Cole Harrison had been working behind the bar of the Broken Spur for 22 months when everything changed, had hired him on almost instinct. The man had walked in on a Tuesday afternoon, slow day, dead hour, that gray stretch between the lunch crowd leaving and the early evening regulars arriving, and he had sat down at the bar and ordered black coffee and said he was looking for work, had studied him for a moment. The man was in his early 50s, tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that wasn't gym-built, but life-built, the kind of physicality that comes from years of doing actual things with your body rather than performing exercises for appearance. Ongoing to gray, cut short and practical. His face was calm in the specific way that very few faces are calm. The way a lake is calm on a windless morning, not because nothing is there, but because everything is held very, very still beneath the surface. He had looked Frank in the eyes when he spoke, and he had not looked away. Experience? Frank had asked. Some, Cole said, had almost laughed. Some, as if the man was understating something enormous, and the understatement itself was a kind of courtesy. From around here. No. Where from? Pause. Not the pause of someone hiding something, or maybe it was, but not in a guilty way. More like the pause of someone choosing how much to say. Different places, Cole said. I traveled around a lot. You in any trouble? Cole met his eyes again, steady and direct. Not anymore. Frank had hired him that afternoon. He never quite knew why he trusted that answer. Not anymore. It was an answer that contained a history he hadn't asked to hear, and Frank was a man who respected the idea that some histories weren't meant to be shared all at once. He had his own parts of his past he kept folded away. He understood the need for that. What he did know was that within the first week, Cole Harrison had proved himself to be the best employee the Broken Spur had ever seen. Not flashy, not the kind of bartender who told jokes and did tricks and turned every customer interaction into a performance. Cole was the opposite. He was present, completely, utterly present, in a way that very few people ever managed to be. When someone sat down at his end of the bar, he gave them his full attention. Not part of it, all of it. He remembered their names after the first time. He remembered what they drank. He remembered the things they said in passing, the things they thought nobody was really listening to, and he filed those things away and asked about them the next time. He fixed things without being asked. A loose hinge on the supply room door fixed. A leak under the second sink fixed. The sound system that had been cutting out randomly for 3 years fixed on a slow Wednesday afternoon when Cole had apparently spent 2 hours tracing the wiring until he found a loose connection nobody had ever thought to check. He never talked about himself. That was the thing people noticed. When customers asked where he was from, he deflected easily and naturally, turning the conversation back to them with a skill so smooth you almost didn't notice it had happened. When Emily, the waitress, who had been working the Broken Spur since she was 19 and was now working her way through an online business degree, had asked him once, half joking, whether he was in witness protection, he had smiled and said something like that, and the smile was warm enough that you couldn't quite tell if he was kidding. Emily Carter was 24 years old, and she had the particular combination of toughness and warmth that small towns sometimes produce in people who grow up having to figure things out for themselves. She was good at her job in the way Cole was good at his, not through performance, but through genuine attention. She knew which tables needed more time and which ones needed her to stay away. She knew how to handle a difficult customer with a smile that was technically friendly and actually a wall. She had been doing it long enough that it was second nature. She and Cole had developed a working rhythm that neither of them had to think about. He watched the bar, she worked the floor. When things got busy, they moved around each other with the efficiency of people who understood each other's instincts. She had asked him once, after a particularly complicated Friday night, where they'd handled a full house almost entirely without speaking, where he had learned to read a room like that. He had been quiet for a moment, wiping down the counter. He said. She had learned not to push past that. The regulars liked him. The truckers who stopped in off the highway liked him. Ranchers who came in on Friday nights liked him. He didn't say much, but what he said landed. He didn't laugh easily, but when something genuinely struck him as funny, the laugh was real and sudden, and it surprised people in a good way. The kind of man whose presence made a room feel more secure, something about him communicated, without words or effort, that while Cole Harrison was in the building, certain things were simply not going to happen. Nobody talked about it directly. Nobody said, I feel safer when Cole is here. They just noticed, on the rare evenings he had off, that things felt slightly looser, slightly less settled, like a particular kind of gravity had been removed. And none of them, not Frank, not Emily, not any of the regulars knew why. Scars on his hands, long-healed, faded to silver but present. The kind of scars that have a history. They noticed the way he always positioned himself so that his back was never fully to the door. Dramatically, not obviously, but always. Every time, anything. They noticed that his eyes, those steady gray-blue eyes, did something the moment a new person walked through the door. Complete rapid scan, entry points, potential threats, exits. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, and then it was over, and his face returned to its default expression of calm attention. But it happened. Every single time. Some people have a past that stays in the past. Cole Harrison had a past that had simply agreed for a while to wait. What Frank Dalton did not know, what none of them knew, was that the man behind their bar had spent 25 years as one of the most respected and feared members of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Not feared in the way that word gets thrown around casually. Not feared because of reputation or appearance or the look of him on a motorcycle. Was feared in the way that earned respect sometimes produces fear as a side effect because Cole Harrison had spent a quarter century doing things that needed doing in situations where most people would have folded, and he had done them with a steadiness and capability that had become something close to legend within a world that did not hand out legends easily. He had never wanted that. He had not joined the club looking for power or recognition or a title to carry. He had joined because he believed in something, believed in loyalty, believed in the idea that some people needed to be protected by people capable of protecting them, believed in a code that said you stood by your brothers and you stood between the innocent and the people who preyed on them. He had been good at it, terrifyingly good at it. The kind of good that gets noticed and then gets talked about and eventually gets turned into something larger than the original truth, which was simply that Cole Harrison was a man with an extraordinary combination of physical capability, tactical intelligence, and complete emotional control under pressure. He had never lost his head. That was the thing. In 25 years of situations where losing your head was the easiest and most understandable thing in the world to do, Cole Harrison had never once lost his. But the years accumulated, and what you carry long enough starts to leave marks not just on your hands, but somewhere deeper. The things he had done in service of protection had sometimes required him to stand very close to darkness, and standing close to darkness long enough changes you in ways you don't always notice until you step back into the light and see your own shadow and realize it has a different shape than it used to. 7 years ago, Cole had walked away. He had done it the right way, with respect, with proper process, with conversations that needed to be had and were had. He had not run. He had not broken faith. He had simply said at a moment when he was being listened to that he was done, that he wanted something else, that whatever he had contributed was now given, and he needed to go find out who he was when he wasn't the man they knew him as. There had been respect for that, not happiness. Nobody cheered when someone like Cole decided to leave. Respect. And so he had drifted. For a couple of years, he had moved from place to place, taking jobs that paid cash and required skill with his hands and didn't ask too many questions. He had ended up in Montana almost by accident. He'd been driving north just because north had seemed like the right direction that week, and he had pulled off the highway because the coffee light on his dashboard had been on for 200 miles, and his body had been insisting on caffeine for about the last 50. He had walked into the Broken Spur Roadhouse. He had ordered black coffee, and Frank Dalton had looked at him with those steady old eyes and said, "You looking for work?" And Cole had said yes before. He'd fully decided to say yes, and that had been that. 2 years, 22 months of early mornings and late nights, and the particular pleasure of a life made simple. The pleasure of problems that could be fixed with a wrench or a mop or a conversation. Something straightforward, in exchange for something straightforward. The pleasure of no one needing anything from him that cost him any part of himself. He had started to believe genuinely, carefully, like a man testing thin ice, that maybe this was something he could keep, that maybe quiet lasted. He was wrong. A Wednesday afternoon, when the 4 men walked in, not unusual for strangers to come through. The Broken Spur sat on a trucking route, and unfamiliar faces were common enough that Frank and Emily had long since stopped marking them as anything notable. You got all kinds out here. You got tired long haulers and seasonal ranch workers and lost tourists and people who were just passing through and needed somewhere to eat lunch that wasn't a gas station. So when the bell above the door rang at about 2:30 in the afternoon and 4 men came in, nobody's posture changed. The place had maybe 8 people in it, a couple of regulars at the bar nursing early beers, 2 guys from a nearby ranch splitting a late lunch at a corner table, and Emily refilling coffee, restocking from the supply room. Cole was behind the bar. He had been cleaning glasses. He continued cleaning glasses, but the scan happened. Automatic, instant, complete. 4 men, 25 to 35 years old. Not from around here. 3 of them fanned out slightly as they came through the door. Not the natural spreading of people deciding where to sit, but the practice spreading of people who do not want to be crowded together. The 4th walked point. Expensive boots that were kept clean in a way that made no sense for this part of Montana, where clean boots lasted about as long as the parking lot allowed. Clothes that said money but worn, in a way that said it was money meant to be seen. The one walking in front had the particular posture of a man who had decided some time ago that being in charge of a room was simply a thing he was entitled to. And the three behind him walked in a way that confirmed that belief back to him. Cole set down the glass he was holding, picked up another, kept his eyes moving normally, casually, in the way that made it look like he wasn't tracking anything at all. The leader came to the bar. He sat down on a stool with the leisureliness of someone who was not interested in the menu or the beer or anything the Broken Spur was actually selling. He was good-looking in an aggressive way, sharp features, thick dark hair, and his early 30s, dark eyes that scanned the room in a manner completely unlike Cole's scan. Cole scanned for threat and exit. This man scanned for weakness. Who would fold and who wouldn't? Bartender, he said, turned to face him. What can I get you? Just water for now. A brief pause, the kind that's meant to signal that the real conversation is about to begin. Dalton around? Something in Cole's chest went still. He kept his face neutral. Might be. You know Frank? Not yet. The man smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Derek Voss. I've got some business I'd like to discuss with him. Frank came out from the supply room 20 minutes later. He came through the swinging door carrying a case of glasses, wrapped in brown paper. He saw the four men arranged through his bar, the leader at the counter, two of the others positioned near the door, the youngest sitting at a table watching the room. He stopped, just for a fraction of a second, a professional fraction of a second, the kind you get from 31 years of keeping the peace in a room. Then he continued forward and set the glasses down carefully behind the bar. Dalton, Derek Voss said. That's me. Great. Derek's smile came back easy and cold. He was. Why don't we get a table? I'd like to talk to you about something I think is going to be very good for your business. Frank, who had survived everything, who had rebuilt his kitchen after a fire and kept his doors open through 3 recessions. Frank looked at the 4 men spread through his roadhouse and understood exactly what kind of conversation he was about to have. That Cole was behind the bar still, cleaning a glass. Their eyes met for perhaps 1 second. Frank said, let's sit down. Voss laid it out the way men like him always do, with the vocabulary of business, the language of partnership, the friendly framing of a proposition that isn't a proposition at all. He talked about protection, about how the area around Route 12 had been seeing increased activity as word from elements that a business like the Broken Spur couldn't be expected to handle on its own. He talked about the value of having people looking out for you, people with reach, people with resources. Frank listened, as he was. He had known what was coming from the moment he saw them, and knowing it didn't make it easier. What kind of number are we talking about? Frank said. Told him. The number was not possible. Not for the Broken Spur. Not for a business that operated on margins as thin as the ones Frank operated on. Frank knew his books the way Cole knew the bar completely, without having to think about it. He what came in and what went out, and he knew that the number Derek Voss had just said would make the column that went out larger than the column that came in. I can't do that, Frank said. Derek's expression didn't change. I really think you can. No, Frank's voice was steady. I've been running this place for 31 years. I know what I can and can't do. What you're asking is more than I make. Then maybe you need to make more. Derek leaned forward slightly. Maybe the issue is how you're running things. I've got ideas about how a place like this could generate a lot more revenue. I'm not interested in your ideas, Frank said. Anar, I'm not interested in what you're selling. The temperature in the room shifted, not dramatically, just a degree or two, but Cole felt it from behind the bar, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the friendly framing was gone, he said, and the name came out with a flatness that was its own kind of threat. I've been very respectful here. I came in here and I sat down and I explained the situation like an adult. I'm giving you the opportunity to make smartest decision. I think you should take it. I think you should leave, Frank said. 3 seconds of silence. Then Derek Voss stood up. Frank, who didn't back down, Frank, who had held this place together. Through everything, Frank suddenly found himself on the floor. It happened fast. Derek had grabbed him by the front of his shirt, half risen from the table, and shoved, and at 67 years old with worn-out knees and the weight of 3 decades of hard work in his body, Dalton went down hard on the floor of his own roadhouse. The sound of it was terrible. Not loud, it was a soft, heavy sound, the sound of an old man hitting boards, but it was terrible in the way that things that should never happen have a particular quality when they do. Emily made a sound that wasn't quite a word and started forward. The other men, Ryan Blake, the reckless one with the violent eyes, stepped in front of her and grabbed her arm. "Easy," he said with a smile that had nothing friendly in it. Froze, the whole room froze, and behind the bar, Cole Harrison set down the glass he was holding. He set it down carefully, deliberately, the way you set something down when you know that whatever comes next is going to require both hands. He looked at Ryan holding Emily's arm. He looked at Frank on the floor. And then he looked at Derek Voss, who was standing in the middle of the room with the confidence of a man who has never once been wrong about who held the power in a given situation. Cole walked out from behind the bar. He moved at normal speed, not rushing, not broadcasting anything, just a man walking across the floor of a bar, each step even. His face carrying that expression that was not quite calm and not quite anything else. The expression that people who had known Cole Harrison for a long time had learned was actually the most dangerous thing about him, because it meant that everything else had been shut off except the one thing that was necessary. He stopped in the middle of the room, and he said quietly to Ryan, "Let her go." Ryan looked at him, sized him up, saw an older man, odd sure, weathered sure, but older, a bartender. He made the calculation that men like him always made when they were wrong about something. He laughed. "Or what?" he said. The room was so quiet that the buzzing of the neon beer sign behind the bar was the loudest sound in it. The Cole said, "Or this stops being a conversation." Derek Voss turned. He hadn't paid much attention to the bartender. Up to this point, he had cataloged him in the first pass as non-threat background furniture, and now he gave him a proper look for the first time. "Pal," Derek said, "I'd sit back down if I were you." "Not me," Cole said. It was such a simple response. Such a quiet, matter-of-fact, completely untheatrical statement. But something about it caused one of the men near the door, Mason, the big one, the one who had been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed in the posture of a man who expected this to resolve itself quickly, to shift his weight, just slightly, just enough, because something in the room had changed. Something in Cole's presence had declared itself, and it was the kind of declaration that the part of a person's nervous system that is older than conscious thought recognized before the conscious mind got there. "You need to walk back behind that bar," Derek said, "and you need to pour yourself a drink and stay on things that don't concern you." Cole's eyes moved to Frank on the floor, then to Emily, her arm still gripped, then back to Derek. "Frank Dalton built this place," Cole said, "is trying to build something of her own. You walked in here and decided what they built was yours to take." A pause. "Concerns me." Derek's jaw tightened. "Last chance," Cole said. Something happened in his face, something very small, almost invisible, but it changed the entire quality of what he was communicating. His eyes got a degree quieter, a degree cooler, like something that had been standing very close to the surface had just taken one step back to make room. Away. Ryan let go of Emily's arm, not because he meant to. He did it before he thought about it, the way you flinch before you can stop yourself. And the moment he did it, his face went hard with embarrassment, and he looked at Derek because embarrassment in men like him always converts immediately to anger. Voss looked at Cole Harrison for a long moment, and then he said, "Get him." What happened next lasted 40 seconds. In some ways, it lasted much longer than that. In some ways, for the people in that room, lasted for the rest of their lives, became one of those things that bifurcates memory into before and after that you describe to people years later and still can't quite make them understand, because the reality of it was so different from anything they had a framework for. Mason came first. He was the biggest, and Derek trusted him first. And Mason had been in enough situations like this to know that the way you handle a problem is you address it immediately and decisively, and you don't give it room to breathe. He crossed the distance between them fast. Cole didn't move back. He didn't brace. He didn't widen his stance or raise his hands or telegraph anything. He just adjusted. A small, almost imperceptible shift of weight and angle. And then Mason's momentum was going somewhere. Mason hadn't intended it to go. And the big man found himself redirected with a smooth, mechanical efficiency that was so far from what he expected that his brain couldn't catch up fast enough. He didn't fall. Cole didn't put him down. He just displaced him. Moved him out of the way with the same casual completeness with which you'd move a piece of furniture. And by the time Mason had recovered his balance, Cole was already somewhere else and Ryan was already in motion. Ryan came in angry, which is the worst way to come in. Cole handled him in a way that took approximately 4 seconds and resulted in Ryan sitting on the floor with his back against the bar and a very clear understanding that he was going to stay there. Third man, Eddie, the youngest, the one who had something to prove, hesitated. That hesitation told Cole everything he needed to know, Cole said to him, and his voice was completely flat, carrying no threat or heat or performance. Just information, you don't want this. Eddie stayed where he was. Cole turned to face Mason, who had recovered and was rebuilding his determination. You either, Cole said. There was a moment, the kind of moment that only exists for a few seconds, but that feels like it breathes. And then Cole's shirt, the plain dark flannel he wore every shift, worn thin at the cuffs from 2 years of bar work, had caught on something during the struggle and torn along the shoulder, and the tear had pulled it down enough that tattoo on his upper arm was visible. It was a faded piece of work, years old. The ink had blurred and softened at the edges the way old tattoos do. But the image was still clear to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Voss knew what he was looking at. His face changed, not all at once, in stages, like a structure losing its load-bearing support column. Confidence first, then the calculation, then something that was the beginning of something he wouldn't have admitted to anyone. The angel, he said, barely audible. Less a sentence than an involuntary sound. Mason was looking at the tattoo too. He had taken a step backward. It wasn't just the tattoo, because below the Hells Angels insignia, in work that was older, still so old, the edges had nearly dissolved into the skin, was a second mark. Smaller, more specific, the kind of thing that only meant something if you knew the particular history it represented. Knew. Cole watched him figure it out, watched it land. And Derek said, it wasn't a question. Cole said nothing. Cole Harrison, Derek said, and his voice had gone thin in a way that had nothing to do with the volume. I thought you were done, Cole said. I am done. I have been done for a long time. He looked at Derek with something that wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier, more familiar. It was instead a kind of patient, weary certainty, the expression of a man who has seen through every version of the scene playing out in front of him and knows exactly how each one ends. But being done doesn't mean I'm not still the same person. Cole Harrison, Mason said from somewhere to the left. He said it the way you say the name of something you've been told exists but didn't quite believe until you saw evidence. Voss had walked into the Broken Spur Roadhouse looking for a 67-year-old bar owner who would fold under pressure. He had found something else entirely. He had found the man whose name, in certain circles, in certain conversations, was still spoken with a very particular kind of weight. The man who had earned that weight over 25 years of being what was needed in exactly the moments when that need was most extreme. The man who, even having been gone for years, still existed in the collective memory of everyone who operated in the world. Derek Voss operated in as a kind of fixed point, a thing that was real. Cole looked at Derek. You have a way out of this room, he said. Take it. And the 4 men who had walked into the Broken Spur Roadhouse 2 hours earlier, with complete confidence, walked out of it without a word. The bell above the door rang behind them. The room was quiet, was sitting up against the side of a table, and Emily was beside him, and both of them were looking at Cole in the particular way that people look at someone when they realize, all at once, that they did not know them at all. Cole walked back behind the bar. He picked up the glass he had set down. He began cleaning it. You okay, Frank? He said. Frank's voice, when it came, was slightly unsteady. Yeah, Cole, what the hell? You should put some ice on your elbow, Cole said. You landed hard on your left side. Emily said, who are you? Cole set the glass on the shelf, reached for another. A long moment he was quiet. Then he said, someone trying to be different from who I used to be. He looked at the door. Outside, the sound of an engine starting, then fading down Route 12 toward whatever came next. Cole knew better than to think that was the end. Men like Derek Voss didn't stop. Grouped, they reported. And whoever they reported, to whoever was at the top of whatever structure had sent 4 men out to collect money from roadside bars on Montana highways, that person was not going to receive the news that Cole Harrison had intervened and let it rest. He kept that knowledge quiet inside himself. He kept cleaning glasses. Outside, the Montana wind moved across the highway, and the sign above the parking lot creaked, and the empty afternoon settled back into its silence. But the quiet had changed now. It was the different kind of quiet, the kind that comes before. Cole didn't sleep that night, not because he couldn't. He had trained himself over 25 years of situations where sleep was a luxury that had to be taken in fragments to rest whenever conditions allowed. He could sleep in a chair. He could sleep in a moving vehicle. He could sleep with noise and light and uncertainty pressing on all sides and wake up sharp the moment he needed to be sharp. But that night he lay on the cot in the small room Frank had given him at the back of the property and stared at the ceiling and made himself think through what had just happened with complete honesty. Because the honest version was not comfortable. Derek Voss and his men had left. That was true, but leaving and being gone were two completely different things. And Cole had spent enough years in a world where those distinctions mattered enormously to make no mistake about it now. 4 men had walked into the Broken Spur looking for an easy collection. They had walked out without the money, without their dignity, and with the knowledge that the bartender behind the bar was Cole Harrison. Information was going somewhere. The question was where. He turned it over in his mind the way he used to turn over tactical problems slowly, from every angle, not returning toward a conclusion, because conclusions reached too fast were usually the wrong ones. Voss was not the top of this. Nobody was the top of anything walked into a roadside bar personally to negotiate the first payment. Frank was a collector, a mid-level enforcer, the kind of man who ran a territory for someone larger. That someone larger had a name, and that name was connected to a structure, and that structure had reach that extended beyond 4 men and a highway bar in rural Montana. Cole needed to know whose name was at the top. He sat up at 3 in the morning, swung his legs off the cot, and sat in the dark for a long time thinking about that. The ceiling gave him nothing useful. The dark gave him nothing useful. He had was what he had always had, the ability to be patient with uncertainty while still moving, to acknowledge what he didn't know without letting it freeze him. He knew a few things. He knew Derek Voss had recognized his tattoo. He knew the recognition had produced fear, not calculation, which meant Derek wasn't someone who had a plan for Cole Harrison, which meant whoever sent Derek also probably hadn't planned for this particular complication. That was good. Unprepared people made decisions faster than prepared ones, and fast decisions were usually bad ones, which created openings. He also knew that whatever organization was moving through these small Montana towns collecting protection money was big enough and organized enough to be doing it systematically. Took infrastructure. Infrastructure meant there was a central point, a headquarters of some kind, a person making decisions and directing resources. Cole needed to know who that person was before that person had time to make decisions about him. He got up, got dressed, went behind the bar, because the bar was where he thought most clearly, the repetition of familiar tasks, freeing the part of his mind that needed to work. He made coffee, real coffee, the kind Frank kept in the back for early mornings, strong enough to hold a spoon upright, and he stood behind the counter in his own bar in the dark, and he drank it, and he thought, 4:30 he had a name, not from certainty, from pattern. The way certain criminal organizations moved through rural territories, from what he knew about who had been expanding operations in the northern mountain states in the years before he stepped away. There was only one name that fit the size of what he was looking at, only one organization that had the resources and the structure to be running systematic collection across highways in this part of Montana. Victor Kane. The name surfaced in his memory the way names do when you have spent years carefully not thinking about them all at once, fully formed, carrying everything attached to it. Victor Kane was not a man Cole had dealt with directly in his years with the club, but he was a man Cole knew about, a man whose name had come up in conversations over the years with the weight of someone who needed to be respected and avoided in equal measure. Victor Kane had built his empire on exactly this model: slow expansion through rural areas, buying compliance with the threat of force, keeping his own hands clean while his people did the collecting. He was dangerous not because he was violent. He was dangerous because he was patient, and because he was smart, and because he had spent 20 years making sure that by the time people understood what was happening to them, it was already too late. Cole set down his coffee cup. If it was Kane, and he was increasingly sure it was Kane, then Derek Voss reporting back wasn't just a problem. A specific kind of problem, because Kane would not respond to the news that Cole Harrison was in a Montana roadhouse the way most people would respond. He wouldn't be stopped by it. He might, in fact, be energized by it. Because men like Victor Kane did not look at obstacles the way ordinary people looked at obstacles. They looked at them as tests, as opportunities to demonstrate that they could not be deterred. Cole was still thinking through the implications of that when he heard the back door open. He didn't tense, didn't reach for anything. He tracked the sound, identified its quality, not forced, not careful. The sound of someone who knew where they were going and wasn't trying to hide it and waited. Came through the kitchen doorway in pajamas and slippers, his white hair disordered from sleep, moving with the slightly careful gait of a man whose left side had taken a hard landing on hardwood floors the afternoon before. He stopped when he saw Cole behind the bar. "Figured you'd be up," Frank said. "How's the elbow?" Frank held it up briefly. "Purple." "Doesn't matter." He came around and sat on a stool, the one closest to the kitchen end, the one with the slight wobble that Frank always sat on anyway because he'd been sitting on it for 30 years and the wobble didn't bother him anymore. He looked at Cole across the bar, the way he used to look at him, before all of this, steady, patient, the look of a man who was going to wait until he got the real answer. "Tell me." Cole looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up the coffee and poured a second cup without asking and slid it across the bar. Frank accepted it, wrapped both hands around it, waited. 5 years, Cole said, with the Hells Angels. Nodded slowly, said nothing. "I walked away 7 years ago. Clean break the right way." Cole paused. "I came here because I needed somewhere to be that wasn't connected to any of that. 2 years and it stayed quiet." He met Frank's eyes. "I'm sorry it didn't stay quiet longer." Frank was quiet for a moment, turning the coffee cup in his hands. "Guy Derek, he works for someone, Victor Kane." Turned the name over. "I've heard that name. Most people who run a business near a highway in this part of the state have," Cole said. "He's been expanding for years, moving through small towns, setting up collection, using the threat of force to keep people paying. Systematic. It's slow enough that by the time you realize what's happening, he's already built enough infrastructure around you that it's hard to push back. And now he knows you're here. He will. By morning, if not already." Set down the coffee cup. He looked at it for a second. Then he looked up at Cole and said, "That was characteristic. And also, in that moment, extremely useful. What does that mean for this place?" Cole thought about that for a moment. He could have softened it. He could have given Frank a version that was technically true, but structured to be less alarming than the full truth. He had done that before, in other contexts, with other people, when the full truth was more than the situation required. Frank Dalton was not a man who deserved a softened version of his own situation. "It means Kane is going to view this as a challenge he can't ignore," Cole said. "A man with his structure and his reputation can't have word get around that a bartender in a roadhouse turned away his people. So he's going to respond. The only question is how. Absorb this without visible panic, which was one of the things Cole had always found remarkable about him. How do you respond to that?" Carefully. Cole paused. "And I'm going to need to make a phone call." Frank looked at him. "And who?" "Someone I told myself I wasn't going to call again," Cole said. "Someone who can help." Something shifted in Frank's expression. Something complicated, not fear exactly, but the look of a man recalibrating what he thought he understood about his situation. "Cole," he said, "I don't want trouble brought to this place." Cole's voice was quiet. "Trouble is already here. Question now is what kind of answer we give it." That landed in the silence between them. Frank picked up his coffee, set it down. In the early dark, with the roadhouse empty around them and the highway silent outside, the two men sat together with the weight of what was coming. "Do what you have to do," Frank said finally. "But I want to know everything." Cole nodded. "Everything," he agreed. He meant it. Lee arrived at 7. She came through the front door the way she always did, a little early, hair still damp from the shower, a travel mug of her own coffee in one hand, because she'd discovered early in her career at the Broken Spur that the first pot of the morning was always Frank's, and you had to be fast or go without, and she had decided she was not someone who went without coffee. She stopped inside the door when she saw Cole standing at the end of the bar. Because his being there was unusual, Cole was always there early. Because of the way he was standing, the posture. She had learned to read Cole's posture over 22 months of working alongside him, and the posture she was looking at now was different from any version she had seen before. Stiller, more deliberate, like a structure that had been reinforced overnight. "You didn't go home," she said. "No." She walked to the bar, set down her coffee, and leaned against the counter the way she did when she was settling in for something. "You can tell me what's happening?" Or are you going to do that thing where you say something vague and then change the subject? Cole looked at her. Something almost like a smile crossed his face, brief, real, the kind that surprised people. Emily. Cole, what happened yesterday doesn't end yesterday. You should know that. She met his gaze without flinching. I figured. Those men don't look like the kind of people who take no for an answer. They don't work for themselves. They work for someone bigger. And that he paused, choosing. That person is going to find out what happened here, and then he's going to decide what to do about it. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then what does he decide usually? Usually he escalates. She absorbed this. She was 24 years old, and she was working her way through a business degree, one class at a time, and she had grown up in a town where hard things happened to people who couldn't prevent them, and she was not, at her core, a person who fell apart in front of hard things. Okay, she said, so what do we do? Cole looked at her. In 22 months, through everything, he had never stopped being slightly surprised by Emily Carter. You should know something about me, he said. I'm starting to figure it out. All of it. He looked at her steadily. What I did before I came here, the life I had before this bar, it was not a quiet life. Spent 25 years with people who solved problems the way these men are trying to solve their problems. Force. With the threat of force. The difference was the reason. Emily was listening, completely, fully, in the way she always listened when something mattered. I left that life because I wanted something different. Stopped, started again, something that didn't cost as much. He paused. But I still know how it works. I still know the language. And if what's coming is what I think it is, I'm going to have to speak some of that language again. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, is Frank okay with that? Cole allowed the surprise to show briefly. You're not asking if I'm okay with it. You already made your decision, she said. I can see it. I'm asking about Frank because it's his bar. Cole exhaled. Something in it that wasn't quite a laugh, but lived near one. Frank said, do what needs to be done. Then do it, Emily said. She picked up her coffee. I'm not going anywhere. He looked at her for another second. Then he picked up the phone. The number he dialed was one he carried in his head, and not in any phone. He had never put it anywhere that could be found, never written it down, kept it only in the part of his memory he reserved for things that mattered. 11 digits. He hadn't dialed it in 7 years. Rang 3 times. Cole, the voice that answered, was rough and warm and carried the particular quality of a man who had been awake for hours but had no interest in announcing it. Cole said, a pause. Hell of a morning to call. You know why I'm calling. Another pause, longer. Cole could hear the quality of the silence on the other end, the thinking silence, the assessing silence, silence of someone who understood that a call from Cole Harrison after 7 years of nothing was not a casual thing and was deciding how to enter what came next. I heard something, Reese said. Word travels. Cole had known it would. That was one of the unchanging features of the world he had left. Information moved fast, particularly information that was surprising. And a Hells Angels enforcer of Cole's reputations, appearing in a rural Montana bar and disabling 4 of Victor Kane's collection men, was the kind of information that would not stay local. Victor Kane, Cole said. Yeah. Reese's voice went a degree flatter. That's what I heard. Is it his operation? Cole, everything between here and the Canadian border is Kane's operation now. And building it for 6 years. You've been gone a while. A pause. He's bigger than you remember. Cole absorbed this. Roadhouse. The people here, they're not connected to anything. They're just people who built something and don't deserve to have it taken. I know. Reese paused. I knew Frank Dalton had a new bartender that nobody knew much about. I didn't put it together until about an hour ago. He's 67 years old, Reese. He built that place over 30 years. Working there, she's 24, and she's trying to build a life. I've been watching both of them for 2 years, and they're good people in the exact way that good means something. Silence on the line. Cole, I know what I'm asking. Reese's voice shifted, not harder, just more present. Waited because you left clean. You did it right, and everyone respected it, and you disappeared, and that was supposed to be permanent. You call now and say Kane's name and ask me to bring brothers into a situation that's not a small ask. That's not something you do once and walk away from again. Cole didn't answer immediately. He looked at the bar. At the counter he had cleaned every night for 22 months. At the shelves of glasses he had arranged and rearranged and kept in order. stools where regulars sat and told him things they didn't tell anyone else, and where Frank sat with his coffee in the morning, and where Emily stood and gave him that particular look when she was deciding whether to push him on something. He said, "I know what I'm asking." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Reese said, "We're coming." Cole said, "I don't want a war. I want them to understand this place isn't available." "I know the difference," Reese said. "So do the brothers. I'll bring." A brief pause. "Kane's not going to send Derek Voss back. You know that, right? Next time he sends something bigger, then we'd better be there first." Cole said nothing. He didn't need to. "Tonight," Reese said. "Don't go anywhere." The line went dead. Cole set the phone down on the bar. Emily was watching him from the far end of the counter. She had heard enough to understand the shape of it, even if she hadn't caught every word. "Help is coming," she said. "Tonight." She nodded once, slowly. "Then I should call the morning regulars. Tell them we're closed today." Cole looked at her. Why? He was. Because whatever is going to happen, it should happen with fewer civilians in the building. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has made a practical decision and is finished being argued with about it. "I grew up on a ranch, Cole. I know what it looks like when you're getting ready for something." Cole held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah." The morning passed in a particular kind of quiet that was nothing like the usual quiet of a slow day. It was the quiet of preparation of two people, and one old man moving through a familiar space with the knowledge that the familiar space was about to become something else, at least for a while, and attending to the things that needed attending to before that happened. Restocked the bar, not because he expected to be serving customers, but because restocking was what he did, and doing it gave him something to do with his hands. Emily made 2 batches of food and wrapped them and put them in the back. People are going to need to eat at some point and clean tables that didn't need cleaning, and somewhere in the middle of that, paused at the window and looked out at the parking lot for a long moment before going back to work. Cole spent most of the morning on the phone, not the call he'd made to Reese and others. Short calls carefully placed to people who held specific pieces of information he needed. He kept his voice low and his words minimal, and after each call he would be quiet for a minute before making the next one, processing what he'd learned. The picture that assembled itself over the course of 3 hours was not good. Victor Kane's operation in Montana was larger than he had estimated from the previous night's reasoning. It had been building for 6 years, as Reese had said, and 6 years of steady building in that space had created something with real depth, not just collection routes and enforcement muscle, but relationships, paid informants in local law enforcement, a structure of legitimate businesses that moved money and provided cover. Kane was not a man operating outside the system. He had made himself part of the system in ways that made the system harder to use against him. That was the smart move. Cole had always known Kane was smart. He had also learned, through a contact who operated in a very different world, but owed Cole a very old debt, that Derek Voss had made his report within an hour of leaving the Broken Spur. And the report had gone directly to Kane, not through any intermediate. That directness told Cole something. Either Derek had known this particular bar was on Kane's personal radar for some reason, or the news about Cole was significant enough that Derek had bypassed normal channels. Either way, Kane knew. Kane was aware. And Kane was not a man who needed time to think about how to respond to challenges. He was a man who had built 6 years of empire by responding to challenges with speed and overwhelming force. Cole was on his 4th call, a short conversation with an old associate in Billings who knew the geography of Kane's operation better than almost anyone when Frank came out from the supply room and stood in the middle of the bar floor. And simply, someone's watching the parking lot. Cole put the call on hold, looked at Frank, where pickup truck, been parked on the highway shoulder opposite for about 40 minutes. Nobody gets out, just sits. Cole set the phone down face down on the bar. He moved to the window, not close to it, not where he'd be visible, just close enough to confirm what Frank was describing. The truck was there, dusty, late model, angled slightly, so the driver had a sight line to the Broken Spur's front door and parking lot. Cole couldn't see the occupant clearly at this distance, but he could see that whoever was in the driver's seat was not moving and was not pretending to be doing anything else. Cole said, "They want to know who comes and goes," Frank said. And he was. Before they move, Emily said from behind the bar, where she had been listening. She said it simply, like a fact, like she had understood the tactical logic of it without needing it explained. Cole looked at the truck for another moment. Then he moved away from the window and picked up his phone. Kane already has eyes on this place, he said into the phone. How close are your people to the Billings corridor? On the other end said something. Cole said, it needs to be before dark. Another exchange. Thank you. He hung up, looked at Frank. The truck is going to be there until someone tells it to leave or until something happens worth reporting, Cole said. I'm going to step outside and give him something to report. Stared at him. What? He's watching to see if I'm still here and whether I've called for help. If I walk outside and act like an ordinary Tuesday, he reports back that the situation is static. That buys time, and if he's not just watching, Emily said, he's just watching. Kane doesn't move until he has information. He's too careful for that. Cole paused. I'll be outside for 10 minutes. I'll come back in. Frank grabbed his arm as he turned. Frank's grip was the grip of a 67-year-old man with a bruised elbow, which was not impressive by objective measure. Cole stopped. You told me everything, Frank said. I did. Tell me this. Whatever is coming tonight, are we going to make it through? Cole looked at the old man, at the white hair and the capable hands and the 31 years of holding something together against everything. Yes, Cole said. He said it the way he said things when he meant them completely. Not the way people say yes when they are trying to be comforting. The way you say yes when you have run the calculation and arrived at a conclusion you're prepared to defend. Grip loosened. He nodded. Cole walked to the door, opened it, stepped outside into the Montana afternoon, moving at his ordinary pace, unhurried, purposeful, sat up the walk of a bartender who had some maintenance task to attend to, and crossed the parking lot to check the gravel near the road, the way you'd check it before calling someone to fill in the worst of the potholes. He spent 8 minutes doing this, visible, unhurried, giving the man in the truck exactly the image of normalcy he needed to see. When he came back inside, he glanced at the window. The truck was still there, reporting. Cole went back behind the bar. By 2 p.m, he had pieced together enough about Kane's operation to know one more thing that he hadn't known that morning, and it was the thing that changed the weight of everything else he knew. The contact in Billings, in his final communication, had mentioned something almost in passing, a detail about a meeting Kane had personally attended 3 months ago with representatives from 2 other organizations, a meeting where Kane had reportedly laid out a consolidation strategy for the Northern Mountain Territory that would, if executed, make his operation effectively unassailable by anyone operating at the local level. 3 months ago, the Broken Spur was on Route 12. 12 was a primary corridor in the territory Kane had described. This wasn't about one roadhouse. It wasn't even about Frank Dalton's money. The Broken Spur had been identified months ago as part of a network of businesses that Kane intended to absorb into his operation, not destroy, but absorb, convert into nodes in his supply chain, use as legitimate fronts. The protection payment was the first step. Compliance was the second. After compliance came dependency, and after dependency, there was no more line between your business and his. Cole sat with this for a moment. Then he looked at Frank, who was sitting at the bar reading something on his phone, with the reading glasses he always pretended he didn't need, he said. Frank looked up. This was never just about the money, Cole said. I'm going to take this place. Not burn it. Take it. Turn it into something that belongs to Kane's operation. The payment was the way they get your compliance. Once you're compliant, once you're dependent. He stopped, took off the reading glasses. His face was still. They were going to own the Broken Spur, he said. They were going to own you, Cole said. The place was the means. You were the end. A business owner who's been here 31 years, who everybody in the county knows and trusts, that's a valuable asset to someone running a shadow operation. You become the face of legitimacy over something that isn't legitimate at all. It was quiet. In the silence, something passed across his face. Fear, something harder than fear, something in the region of fury, held very still. He was. My father built the first version of this building, Frank said. His voice was low and even. With his own hands. We didn't have the money for contractors, so he and his brother put up every beam themselves. I have photographs. I used to show them to my kids. He stopped. Nobody is going to make this place into something it isn't. Cole held his gaze. No, he said, they're not. Outside, the sun had moved. The light through the windows had gone from afternoon white to the first edge of gold. That meant evening was a few hours away. Somewhere on the roads leading north through Montana, the sound of motorcycles was getting closer. Cole could almost hear it. Maybe he actually could. Maybe it was memory and anticipation rather than sound. But something in his body recognized what was coming the way your body recognizes things before your mind catches up, and he stood behind the bar of the Broken Spur Roadhouse and felt, for the first time in 7 years, a particular sensation of standing in a place where what he was and what was needed were exactly the same thing. He had left that life. He had meant to leave it permanently. But there was a difference. He was understanding now, understanding it in a way that was more complete than he had understood it before, between leaving a world and being able to leave what that world had made you. The skills didn't leave. The instincts didn't leave. The capacity didn't leave. What he had walked away from was the context, the daily application of what he was to situations that were about power and money and dominion. What he was standing in now was different. This was Frank's 31 years. This was Emily's future. This was a building held together by stubbornness and loyalty and the refusal to quit, standing on the side of a highway in Montana and trying to keep being itself against something that wanted to consume it. Cole reached under the bar and picked up the phone one more time. He sent a single message to Reese. 3 words, "Come before dark." Response came back in under 30 seconds. Already here. Cole looked up from the phone. Outside the front windows of the Broken Spur, the light had shifted again. And in that shifting light, coming off the highway and into the gravel lot, was the sound and the shape of the first motorcycle. Another, then more. Frank stood up from his stool. Emily came out from behind the bar, stood in the roadhouse that Frank's father had built with his own hands, and watched as the parking lot outside filled one by one, steady and purposeful, and without theatrics, with the people Cole had called. He said very quietly, "How many?" "Enough," Cole said, to the door. Reese Calloway was not a large man, thing people noticed about him, and it was always the thing that misled them. Be 5'10", lean through the shoulders, somewhere in his mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had been weathered by decades of road and weather and decisions that didn't have comfortable options. He moved with the economical precision of someone who had long ago stopped caring about how he appeared and was entirely focused on what was functional. Cole stepped out into the parking lot, and Reese stepped off his motorcycle at almost exactly the same moment, and the 2 men looked at each other across the gravel for a beat that was longer than necessary and shorter than what it contained. Then Reese crossed the distance and put his hand out, and Cole took it. "You got old," Reese said. "So did you." "Yeah, but I look distinguished." Reese glanced around at the roadhouse, the gravel lot, the highway shoulder where the surveillance truck had been parked all afternoon. The truck was gone. Now it had pulled out 20 minutes ago, which told Cole that whoever was in it had seen enough and was reporting. "This is what you landed in. This is what I built," Cole said, without defensiveness, just the fact of it. Reese heard the distinction. He nodded once. Behind him, the others were dismounting. Cole counted 11 men in addition to Reese, 12 total. He recognized 6 of them brothers he had ridden with, stood beside, trusted with his life in situations that tested what trust actually meant. Other 6 were faces he knew by reputation rather than direct experience. Younger men who had come up in the years since Cole had been gone, but men that Reese had chosen to bring, which, enough. None of them made noise about being there. There were no performances of arrival, no displays. They dismounted and stretched and looked around and moved toward the building with the efficient quietness of people who understood what they were there for and were focused on that. Cole held the door open. Frank was standing behind the bar, put on a clean shirt at some point during the afternoon. Cole noticed a detail that was so entirely Frank that it almost broke something in his chest. The old man had known something serious was coming, and his response had been to put on a clean shirt to meet it properly. Frank looked at the 12 men filing into his roadhouse, and his expression changed, and he said steadily, "What can I get everybody?" Quite a question. It was the reflex of a man who had been running a bar for 31 years, the instinct that kicked in when a room filled with people regardless of the circumstances. Frank Dalton's answer to a hard situation was to put something useful in front of the people who had to deal with it. He looked at Cole. Cole looked at Frank. "Coffee," he said. "A lot of it." Frank moved. Emily was already behind the bar, pulling cups, filling the industrial percolator that Frank only brought out for large gatherings. She worked fast and without being asked, her movements efficient and calm, and if she felt anything about the fact that her workplace had just filled with a dozen Hell's Angels members, she had decided that feeling it was a task for later, and right now there was coffee to be made. Watched her for a moment. then said quietly to Cole, "She's good." "She is," Cole agreed. The men arranged themselves through the bar with the natural tactical instinct of people who assess space automatically, some at the bar, some at tables, a couple near the windows. No one had to direct it. It just happened. Sat across from Cole at the corner table, the one Cole preferred, the one with sightlines to both the front door and the side windows, and folded his hands on the table and got into it without preamble. "Kane already knows," Reese said. "Whatever your surveillance truck reported, it got to him fast. My guy on the inside says Kane took the call personally. That doesn't happen for small stuff." "How'd he react?" Reese's jaw tightened slightly. "Kane gets quieter when he's angry. Always has. Loud people telegraph. Kane goes silent and then things happen." Cole thought about this. "Timeline? My read? He moves tonight. Not with Derek's people. Derek is finished. Kane doesn't use assets that have already failed. Something different. Something with more weight." Reese paused. Another pause. The kind that meant what came next was the part that was harder to say. "Cole, my guy says Kane has been waiting for something like this." And went still. "Explain." "Kane knew you were here 2 months ago. Not after yesterday. He knew before that. He had you flagged as soon as you crossed into his territory, which was about 18 months ago. Reese held Cole's gaze. "He didn't move on it because you weren't doing anything. You were a bartender. You weren't connected to anything on his list." Cole absorbed this in silence. 18 months. He had been in Montana for 22 months, and for 18 of those months, he had been known to Victor Kane. The idea of it moved through him strangely, not quite fear, not quite anger, something more fundamental than either. The feeling of having believed you were invisible and discovering the invisibility had been a courtesy rather than a fact. Cole said, "I'm nobody to Kane. We've never directly crossed. Because of what you represent." Reese said, "Cole, you left the club. You disappeared. And the story of what Cole Harrison used to be, that story doesn't die just because you walk away from it. If anything, it got bigger. Men like Kane don't like big stories they can't control. You being here, even doing nothing, was a variable he couldn't account for." Reese looked at him steadily. "Yesterday you stopped being a variable he could ignore." The weight of this settled on Cole fully. He had come to Montana to be no one, to be the man who cleaned glasses and fixed chairs and listened and stayed quiet. And the world he had left had tracked him here anyway, not because he had done anything to attract it, what he used to be, because the reputation he had earned over 25 years was a thing that existed independently of whether he claimed it. He used Derek's collection route as an opportunity, Cole said. Out was already planned. The Broken Spur was already on the list. But when Derek reported what happened here, Kane saw something. "Reason," Reese said. "Yeah, he wanted a confrontation. He wants a resolution. Cole Harrison, existing unaffiliated in his territory, unchecked, that's a problem for him, regardless. Better to make it happen on his terms, on his timeline." Cole leaned back slightly. His jaw worked. His eyes went to the window briefly, then back to Reese. Had come around the end of the bar with a large coffee and set it in front of Cole without interrupting. Just the coffee, placed with the quiet attentiveness of a man who was paying attention to everything and deciding that what Cole needed right now wasn't questions. Cole put his hand briefly on Frank's arm as he turned away. Paused. "You need to know something," Cole said. Turned back. "He knew I was here before yesterday. 18 months. Cole watched Frank's face. The Broken Spur was already on his list. "This wasn't random. You were going to be approached regardless of whether I was here." Was very still for a moment. "So this isn't your fault," Frank said. "Not saying that. You are," Frank said. "You're saying this would have happened anyway. You're telling me because you think you brought this down on Frank's S, something that was unexpectedly the beginning of something like wry recognition. "Cole, I've been running a bar on a trucking highway for 31 years. You think I've never had men like that walk through my door before?" I looked at him. "I handled it before," Frank said. "Not as well as you did yesterday, maybe. But this is my business. This has always been my problem. You didn't cause it. At least for a day." He paused. "So stop carrying it like it's yours alone." Cole said nothing. Frank went back behind the bar. Reese, who had heard all of it, said nothing for a moment. Quietly, "Good man." "Yeah," Cole said. Reese pulled out a folded piece of paper and spread it on the table. It was a hand-drawn layout, rough, clearly done quickly, but accurate in the way that suggested it had been drawn by someone who had been to this location or had received a detailed description from someone who had. It showed the roadhouse, the parking lot, the highway shoulder, the access road that ran behind the property, and two other positions Cole immediately recognized as tactical advantages: a rise in the land to the northeast that gave line of sight to the front lot, and the tree line along the access road that could cover approach from the back. He comes from two directions minimum, Reese said. Highway approach and the access road. He'll want to have the building bracketed before his main people come to the door. Cole looked at the map. His mind moved through it the way it used to move through these things quickly, completely, identifying relationships between positions and timing and likely decision trees. It's a kind of thinking he hadn't done in 7 years, and it came back with a completeness that was not entirely comfortable. In the place, Cole said. He wants it intact. He's not coming to destroy, he's coming to take, which means his people have orders to end this cleanly. No collateral damage to the asset. Exactly. Reese looked up, which means we have more freedom of movement than he does. He has to be careful with what he sends in. I don't want this to be a fight, Cole said. Reese met his eyes. I know. I want Kane to see that this isn't worth what it costs. That this particular place, this particular situation is not going to resolve the way he has everything else resolving. I want him to make a business decision. Reese was quiet for a moment, asking Kane to make a rational choice. I'm asking Kane to look at his options and find only one of them that doesn't cost him significantly. And if he doesn't, Cole held his gaze, then we deal with what comes. Reese nodded slowly. He looked around the room at his men, at the men drinking Frank's coffee and speaking quietly to each other and doing the particular preparatory things that people do when they are getting ready for something that requires complete presence. Then he looked back at Cole. I need to say something, Reese said, and I need you to hear it. Say it. When you walked away 7 years ago, some people were hurt by that. Angry, hurt. There's a difference. Reese kept his voice level, not accusatory, just honest, in the way that long friendship creates the obligation to be honest. And people counted on. And when you were gone, there was a gap where you used to be that took a long time to fill. I'm not saying you were wrong to go. I understood why. I wanted you to know it cost something. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two men who had been through enough together that they could be silent about hard things without needing to fill the space. Cole said, I know, and I need you to know, Reese continued, that the reason I'm here tonight, the reason all of them are here tonight, it's not obligation. Nobody owes you anything, and nobody came because they felt they had to. He looked at Cole directly. They came because it's you. Because when I made the call and said Cole Harrison needs us, every single person I called said yes before I finished the sentence. You want to know what your 7 years away cost? That's also what it didn't cost. Cole looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his face was the same as it always was, composed, steady, giving nothing away easily. But something had shifted very slightly in his eyes. Thank you, he said, just that. Reese picked up his coffee. Thank me until this is over. It was 7:43 in the evening when the first sign came. It came from the man Reese had positioned at the Northeast Rise, one of the younger brothers, a quiet, focused man named Garrett, who had spent several years in the military before finding his way to the club and who had the particular quality of stillness that comes from training yourself to notice things before they become events. It sent a text to Reese's phone. Reese read it, showed it to Cole. 4 vehicles, highway approach. Coming in slow. Cole stood up. The room shifted. It was not loud. It was not chaotic. It was the quality shift of people who have been waiting for a specific thing to begin, and now it has begun. And the waiting is over. Everything that replaces waiting is cleaner and more manageable than waiting itself. Said something brief to his people. Positions adjusted. The 2 men nearest the windows moved slightly. 2 others drifted toward the back. Emily had already taken Frank to the supply room. Cole had arranged this an hour earlier, and Emily had agreed without argument, though she had looked at Cole with an expression that said she was going to want a full account of everything afterward, and he had better be prepared to provide it. Cole stood at the front of the bar. He had not put on anything different. He was still wearing the bartender's clothes, dark flannel, worn jeans, work boots. The shirt that had torn during yesterday's confrontation had been replaced with another one that was almost identical. He had the look of a man who had simply not changed, and that was exactly what he intended. Bartender. He was Cole Harrison. Both things were true, and tonight both things were going to matter. The vehicles pulled into the parking lot, not 4-6. Two more had come in from the access road behind the building, which Reese had anticipated and had already covered. Cole registered this through the body language of the man nearest the back window, a slight shift of confirmation that meant what was supposed to be there was there. He watched the front door. It opened. The man who came through it was not Derek Voss. Voss would have been manageable, in the sense that Cole already knew what Derek was: a confident, mid-level enforcer with a short red on the room. The man who came through the door of the Broken Spur at 7:49 on a Wednesday evening was something considerably different. He was in his late 40s, compact and precise looking, with the kind of face that gave nothing away, not because it was blank, but because it was extremely controlled. He wore a dark jacket that was too clean for rural Montana, and he moved through the door with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been trained to assess a room in the first 3 seconds of entering it. He assessed the room in the first 3 seconds of entering it, and what he found was 12 Angels brothers distributed through the space, and Cole Harrison standing in the middle of it, and his own tactical advantage of 6 vehicles dissolved instantly into the recognition that whoever had sent him had not known about this, and whoever had sent him was going to need to be called. The man stopped. For 1 second, something moved across his face. Fear. Cole didn't think this man did fear in any conventional sense. Like recalculation, like a computer running a different set of variables than the ones it had been given. Then he said calmly, "I'm looking for the owner." "Dalton isn't available," Cole said from behind the bar, and looked at him. "Took a beat, and you are." "Harrison." "Another beat. Longer. I know who you are." "Then you know," Cole said, "that Frank Dalton isn't someone you want to have a conversation with tonight, because any conversation you have with him, you're having with me first." The man was quiet. He looked around the room, taking in Reese, taking in the others, doing the arithmetic of what he was seeing against what he had been sent here to accomplish. The arithmetic was not producing a favorable result. "I'm going to need to make a call," he said. "Make it," Cole said. The man stepped back toward the door, phone already in hand. He went outside. The door closed behind him. Reese materialized at Cole's shoulder. He said quietly. "Kane," Cole agreed. They waited. 4 minutes. 4 minutes in which the bar was as quiet as Cole had ever heard it. 12 men and a bartender, and the sound of the highway outside, and the buzzing of the neon beer sign, and the particular held quality of air in a space where everyone is paying attention to the same point. Opened again. The man in the dark jacket came back in. He walked to the bar. He set his phone face up on the counter in front of Cole. "He wants to talk to you," he said. Cole looked at the phone. On the screen was a live call, the seconds counting up. He picked it up. "Kane," he said. The voice that came back was not what people expected from a man who had built a criminal empire across the northern mountain states over 6 years. It was measured. It was even. It carried the quality of someone who was always in a room where the temperature was exactly what he had set it to. "Cole Harrison," Victor Kane said. "I've been waiting for this conversation for a while." "I haven't," Cole said, "but here we are." A brief pause. Kane spoke again. Something in his voice had shifted by a degree, not warmer, but less performing, direct. "You know why I'm calling? You know what my man walked into tonight?" "I do. I had a plan for that roadhouse. I had a timeline. I had a process." Another pause. "You disrupted my process." "Dalton built that place," Cole said. "His father put up the first beams himself. His kids grew up there 31 years. You were going to absorb it into something he never agreed to be part of." Cole kept his voice level. Not angry, not aggressive, just clear. "I'm not going to let that happen." Silence on the line. Then Kane said, "You're one man, Harrison. Even with whatever you've assembled in that bar tonight, I have 6 years of infrastructure in this territory. I have resources you can't match. I have patience." A pause. "You really want to make this your war?" "No," Cole said. "I don't want any war. That's the point." He paused. "Let it breathe. I want you to look at this particular situation and decide that it costs more than it's worth. Spur isn't the only bar on Route 12. It isn't the only business in your expansion plan. Place, owned by one old man, and it has a complication attached to it that your other targets don't have." Another pause. "Walk away from this one, just this one." The silence on Kane's end was longer this time. Cole waited. He was good at waiting. He had always been good at waiting. "Asking me to back down," Kane said finally. "I'm asking you to make a rational business decision," Cole said. "You back down from this one location and nobody knows except the people in this room. Operation continues. Your timeline continues. This is a calculated loss, not a defeat. A smart man. You know the difference. Another silence. Then Kane said, my man is going to walk out of that bar, Cole said. And then you and I are even, 1 for 1. You keep your roadhouse, I keep my operation. One condition, Cole said. Go ahead. The business is on Route 12. The other one's on your list. You leave them the choice. Real choice. Nobody gets pushed. The silence this time was different. It had a considering quality. The silence of a man actually running calculations rather than performing them. That's a bigger ask, Kane said. I know what I'm asking, Cole said. Same words he had said to Reese. Same meaning, complete awareness of the weight of the request and the willingness to hold it anyway. Kane was quiet for 8 seconds. Cole counted them. Kane said, you are a significant inconvenience. I've been called worse. Something happened on Kane's end of the line that was almost not quite, but almost a sound of reluctant acknowledgement. My man leaves. We're done with that location.
A pause.
I'll consider your condition. Consider it seriously, Cole said. I always consider things seriously. A final pause. Don't make me regret this. The call ended. Cole set the phone down on the bar. The man in the dark jacket was watching him. Cole slid the phone back across the counter. You're done here, he said. The man picked up the phone. He looked at Cole for a moment, not with hostility, but with the expression of someone reassessing something they thought they understood. Then he turned and walked to the door and went out. And through the window, Cole watched him speak briefly to the people in the vehicles. And one by one, the vehicles turned and pulled out of the parking lot and back onto Route 12 and disappeared into the dark. It was silent. Then Reese let out a breath that was long and slow and contained a tremendous amount of compressed tension. You just negotiated with Victor Kane, he said. Tried to, Cole said. He said he'd consider Cole. Reese looked at him. Kane never considers. Kane decides. If he said consider, he meant yes, and he's giving himself the exit of not having said yes. He paused. That was I have been doing this for 30 years. I have never seen anyone talk Victor Kane off a position he had already committed to. Cole said nothing. From the back, the supply room door opened. Frank came out, moving fast for a 67-year-old man with a bruised elbow, followed by Emily, who was close behind him. Looked around the empty bar, at the windows showing a dark and empty parking lot, at the 12 men who were beginning, now that the tension had released, to look like ordinary people in a bar rather than a tactical unit. Frank looked at Cole. It's done, he said. Cole looked at Frank Dalton at the white hair and the clean shirt and the 31 years and said, for tonight, yeah. Frank put both hands on the bar and leaned on it heavily, and Cole understood that the weight being transferred to that bar was not physical. Emily came around beside him and put her hand on his back, and Frank straightened up after a moment and cleared his throat and looked at Reese and the others with the expression of a man who had been holding himself together for 24 hours and was now beginning the careful process of setting that down. Frank said, and his voice was rough but steady. Let me get you gentlemen some real drinks. The sound that moved through the room at that was not loud, but it was warm. Cole stood behind the bar and watched Frank move, watched the old man pull bottles from the shelf he knew, as well as he knew his own hands, watched him pour with the precision of someone who had been doing it for 3 decades, watched him move through his own space with the particular authority of a person in the place that belongs to them. Burr, still standing, still his. Reese settled onto a stool across from Cole. He looked at the bar, at the room, at the people in it. He looked at pouring, at Emily writing something in the small notebook she always kept in her apron pocket, probably. Cole thought, a list of things to do tomorrow, because Emily was the kind of person who responded to hard situations by immediately beginning to think about what came next. Then Reese looked at Cole and said quietly, under the sound of the room finding its way back to something like normal, you know this isn't fully over. I know, Cole said. Kane is going to honor what he said tonight, but he's also going to watch. He's patient. He said so himself. He's going to wait and see if the situation changes. Then the situation won't change, Cole said. Reese turned the glass in his hands. Staying. It wasn't a question. But Cole answered it anyway. I'm staying, he said. He picked up a glass from behind the bar, held it up briefly to check it, set it down and began to polish it, the motion as familiar and settled as breathing. Outside on Route 12, the night traffic moved the way it always had, trucks going north and south, headlights coming and going, the highway doing what highways do, people between places without caring much about what any of them were carrying inside themselves. Inside the Broken Spur, the lights were on and the bar was full, and Frank Dalton was pouring drinks in his own place for the people who had come to stand with it. It was not the end of things. Cole knew that, but it was the end of tonight, and tonight that was enough. The brothers left before dawn, not all at once. In pairs and small groups, the way they had arrived without ceremony, without announcement, simply present and then gone, the way good people sometimes move through hard situations. By 4 in the morning, the parking lot was empty again except for Reese's bike. And by 4:30, Reese was standing at the bar drinking the last of the night's coffee and looking at with the expression of a man who had something left to say and was deciding how to say it. Cole waited. He had cleaned the bar twice already. On his third pass, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do while his mind worked through what came next. Kane is going to test it, Reese said, not right away. He's too smart for right away. He's going to let 3-4 weeks pass. Let the tension settle. Let you start to think maybe it resolved. And then something small is going to happen. Not aggressive enough to be a direct violation of what he agreed to tonight. And was just enough to measure whether you're still paying attention. I know, Cole said. And if you're still paying attention, he measures again, waits again, looks for the moment you're not. Reese set down the coffee cup. He's been doing this for 6 years. He is exceptionally good at patience. Cole said. Reese looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said, you always were. He picked up his jacket from the stool. You need anything at all you call. Not obligation. Club calling in something you owe. Just brothers. He paused. Stand that. Cole understood it. He said so. Put his hand out. Cole took it. And then Reese Calloway walked out the front door of the Broken Spur Roadhouse. And a minute later, the sound of his motorcycle moved out of the lot and onto Route 12 and faded north. And Cole stood alone in his bar in the early quiet of 4:30 in the morning and let the silence settle around him. He stood there for a while, not thinking exactly, more like integrating the way the body processes something large and complicated by going still with it for a moment before beginning to move again. The last 48 hours had been the most concentrated version of his old life that he had experienced since leaving it, and now that the concentration had passed, what he was left with was not relief exactly, but something more textured, something that contained gratitude and exhaustion and a particular kind of clarity that comes only from having been tested against something real and having held. He was still the bartender. That was what he kept coming back to, all of it. Through Derek Voss and Victor Kane and 12 brothers filling a bar in the Montana dark and a phone call that could have gone 5 different directions, he had remained. Fundamentally, the man behind the counter of a roadside bar on Route 12. He had not gone back to the life he left. He had brought what that life made him into the one he had chosen, and he had used it in the service of the people who mattered to him, and then he had set it down again. Set it down. Not thrown it away, not pretended it wasn't part of him. Just set it down, the way you set down a tool when the work it was needed for is finished. He picked up the last glass, polished it, put it on the shelf. Then he went to the small room at the back of the property, lay down on the cot, and slept. He slept for 6 hours, which was more than he had slept continuously in years. And he was. When he woke up, Frank was in the kitchen making breakfast, and Emily was at the bar with her notebook open, and her online textbook beside it, and her laptop angled toward the light from the window, studying. Just studying, casually, in the middle of everything, as if the most natural response to the previous 48 hours was to continue working toward what she was building. Cole sat down at the bar across from her. She looked up. Coffee. Thanks. She watched him pour it. Then, without looking up from her textbook, are we okay? Cole said. For real okay, or bartender telling the customer what they want to hear okay? Almost smiled. For real okay. Kane backed down. Test, but he backed down. That matters. He paused. I told Reese I'm staying. Emily looked up from the textbook at that. Fully, completely, in the way she listened when something mattered, she said. Then, simply and with finality, good, came out from the kitchen with 2 plates and set them on the bar and pulled up a stool without asking whether anyone wanted breakfast, because Frank's position was that everyone wanted breakfast and people who claimed otherwise were wrong. He sat down and picked up his fork, looked at Cole with the same steady eyes he had him with 2 years ago across this same counter when a stranger had come in looking for work and said the word enough. Now, Frank said. Now we open the bar, Cole said. Looked at him. That's simple. That's simple, Cole said. Kane made a calculation last night. He decided this isn't worth the cost. That calculation doesn't change unless we give him a reason to recalculate. So we don't give him a reason. We open the bar, we do what we do. We stay visible, and we stay steady, and we don't pretend nothing happened, but we also don't act like we're waiting for the next thing. Absorb this for a moment. You sound like you've done this before, he said. Holding ground after you've established it, Cole said. I've done this before. He paused. The hardest part isn't the confrontation. Confrontation is almost easier because at least you know what's happening and you can respond to it. Hard part is the afterward, the maintenance, the daily choice to keep being exactly what you said you were going to be. Nodded slowly. Ate some of his breakfast. Then, Cole, I need to ask you something. Ask you is this. Frank gestured audibly. Not brought, just a small movement indicating the bar, the space between them. Is this still what you want? Because what happened here earns. What you went through, you're going to have to keep going through. Watching Kane's people, maintaining this situation, you didn't sign up for that. You signed up to 10 bar. He looked at Cole directly. I'm not trying to run you off. God knows I'm not. I need to know you're here because you want to be, not because you feel like you started something you have to finish. The question landed with more weight than Frank had probably intended, or maybe exactly as much weight as he intended, because Frank was a man who understood the weight of things he said. Cole was quiet for a moment. He thought about the question honestly, the way Frank deserved. Not the quick answer, not the reassuring answer, but the real one. I drove through Montana 2 years ago. Cole said, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just moving, the way I'd been moving for a couple of years. Not running from anything, I'd made my peace with what I left. Just moving, because sitting still felt like something I had to earn. He paused. I stopped here because I needed coffee. I took the job because you offered it. And then he stopped, started again, and then it became something I didn't expect. Waited. It became the first place in a long time where what I was doing felt like it was worth doing for its own sake, Cole said. Not for the result. Not for the protection or the power or any of the things I used to think made work meaningful. Just for the thing itself, for the coffee and the glasses and the regulars and watching you run this place the way you run it. He looked at Frank, and yes, for watching Emily work toward whatever she's working toward. Emily, from her end of the bar, did not look up from her textbook. Pen stopped moving. I'm not here because I feel obligated, Cole said. I'm here because this is where I want to be. What happened this week didn't change that. If anything, he paused. If anything, it confirmed it. Because I found out what I'll still stand up for. And it turns out it's this. It's you. It's this place. Frank held his gaze for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and went back to his breakfast. And the fact that he didn't say anything was the response that mattered. Because Frank Dalton was not a man who performed gratitude. He received it by continuing, by picking up his fork and eating breakfast at his own bar on the morning after something hard. Which was his way of saying that things were as they should be and the work was going to continue. Cole picked up his own fork. Emily's pen started moving again. They were 3 days into what Reese had predicted, the quiet period, the settling when the first test came. Cole had expected it. He had told himself he expected the difference between anticipating something and feeling it arrive. And when it arrived in a form he hadn't entirely predicted, which was its own lesson about the gap between preparation and reality. It didn't come as aggression. It came as a man named Roy Beckett, who had been a regular at the Broken Spur for 11 years and who drove a delivery route that took him past the Roadhouse twice a week, and who had, in 11 years, never once been anything other than exactly what he appeared to be, a large, friendly, weathered man who liked draft beer and sports radio, and talking about his daughter who was in college in Missoula. Came in on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the confrontation. He sat in his regular spot. He ordered his regular beer. He talked about his daughter. He talked about the drive up from Billings, about the weather, about the game on the television above the bar. And then, when the bar had thinned out to just him and one other regular at the far end, he leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice and said to Cole, "Man came by my house Tuesday." Cole set down the glass he was holding. Roy kept his eyes on the bar surface. He had the look of a man carrying something that was too heavy and had been too heavy for 3 days and was now setting it down because he couldn't carry it any further. "Showed me a picture," Roy said, "of my daughter, outside her dorm in Missoula. Told me she was pretty. Told me he hoped nothing happened to disrupt her year. Roy stopped. His jaw worked. Told me the best thing I could do for her was to let certain people know what was going on at the Broken Spur, who was coming and going, whether anything changed. Still, I didn't agree, Roy said immediately, and the urgency in his voice made it clear that this was the thing he most needed Cole to hear. I didn't agree to anything. I told him to go to hell and I drove away. But then I started thinking about it and he
stopped again.
His hands on the bar were shaking slightly, not from fear of Cole, from the fear that had been sitting inside him for 72 hours. Cole said, "My daughter. She's 20 years old. She's Roy." Cole's voice was quiet and completely certain. "Look at me." Roy looked up. "Your daughter is safe," Cole said. "You just did coming in here and telling me this. That is exactly what you should have done. You did the right thing." He held the man's gaze. "Nothing is going to happen to her." Roy's eyes were bright in the way that a man's eyes get when he's been holding fear alone for too long and someone has finally acknowledged what the fear is actually about. "How do you know?" Roy said, rough. "Real." "Because I know how this works," Cole said. "They threatened her to get information. If they hurt her, they lose the leverage and they gain a situation that's much harder to manage. Not going to hurt her." He paused, "But I'm going to make sure of it." Looked at him for another long moment. Something in his face, the tightness, the held quality of a man trying to maintain himself against something that is threatening to undo him, loosened by 1 degree. "You're going to make a call," Roy said. "Not accusatory." "Standing several," Cole said. Roy nodded. He sat with his beer for a few minutes, not drinking it, just sitting. Then he said, "I've been coming here 11 years. I know. Frank gave me credit twice when my route dried up and I couldn't make ends meet. Didn't tell anybody, just did it." Roy paused. This place as he stopped, apparently unable to finish the sentence in a way that covered what he meant. "I know," Cole said again. Roy left 20 minutes later. He stood up and put money on the bar, more than his bill, by a significant amount, the gesture of a man who needed to contribute something, even if he couldn't name exactly what he was contributing to. And he put his jacket on, and he looked at Cole one more time. "You're a different kind of person than you look like," Roy said. "Most people are," Cole said. Roy went out. Cole picked up the phone. The call he made was not to Reese. It was to a different number, a person he had contacted during the morning of the confrontation. One of the calls he had made while building the picture of Kane's operation. And operated in a world adjacent to Kane's without being inside it, which gave him visibility into Kane's decisions without being subject to Kane's authority. And this person owed Cole a debt that predated Montana by many years. The conversation was brief. What Cole learned from it changed the shape of what he thought he was dealing with. The threat to Roy Beckett's daughter had not been authorized by Victor Kane. Cole sat with this for a long moment after the call ended. It was not Kane. Kane was holding to what he had agreed to imperfectly with the kind of technical precision that allowed him to claim compliance while still gathering information, but holding. The threat to Roy's daughter had come from Derek Voss, who had been humiliated in front of his employer, who had reported his failure and faced consequences for it, not devastating consequences, because Kane was not the kind of man who destroyed assets over a single bad result, but consequences that had apparently produced in Derek Voss the kind of wounded pride that in men like him almost always converted to something dangerous. Was freelancing. He was operating outside Kane's authorization, using Kane's general posture as cover, running his own operation against the Broken Spur out of personal motivation that had nothing to do with Kane's business calculations. He wanted to reestablish his position by delivering what Kane had technically agreed not to pursue: information, compliance, a measure of control over the roadhouse that would allow Derek to present himself as having resolved the situation his failure had created. Cole set the phone on the bar. The complexity of this was real, and he sat with it fully. The response to Kane and the response to Derek required completely different calibrations. Kane was a strategic actor. You dealt Kane through calculation and leverage, and the demonstration that the cost-benefit analysis didn't favor his desired outcome was something else. Derek was a wounded man operating on emotion, which made him unpredictable, which made him in some ways more dangerous than Kane, even though he was far less powerful. Came out from the kitchen and stopped when he saw Cole's expression. "Happened," Frank said. Cole told him. "All of it. The threat, Derek acting independently. leaned against the counter with the particular stillness. He had the stillness of a man who processes hard information by going very quiet and then coming out the other side with whatever he's decided. Frank said, "She's okay," Cole said. "I'm going to make sure it stays that way." "How?" Cole looked at him. "I need to find Derek Voss." Frank's expression shifted slightly. "Cole, not to hurt him," Cole said. "To make him understand that what he's doing is more dangerous for him than he knows. He's operating without Kane's authorization. If Kane finds out, and Kane will find out, eventually Derek has a much bigger problem than I am." He paused. "Offer him a way out that's better than the alternative he's currently moving toward." Was quiet for a moment. "You're going to negotiate with the man who pushed me down on my own floor," Frank said. "To do what gets Roy's daughter safe and gets Derek out of our lives without creating a situation that pulls Kane back in," Cole said. "What Frank Dalton deserves is for this to be over. That's what I'm working toward." Frank looked at him. Then he said, "I trust you." 3 words. Simple. But in Frank Dalton's register, where words were not spent casually, 3 words of that particular type carried the full weight of everything they implied. Cole found Derek Voss the next afternoon, not through tracking or surveillance or any of the more complex methods he had available. He found him the direct way, out through the network of people who knew things in this part of Montana, that Cole Harrison wanted to speak with Derek Voss privately, and that Derek Voss should understand that the conversation was being offered as an alternative to other options that Cole preferred not to use. Response came back within 4 hours. A location. A message that said simply "alone." Cole went alone. The place Derek had chosen was a truck stop 20 miles east on Route 12 neutral ground. Public enough that neither man was exposed, private enough that a conversation could happen without an audience. All arrived 5 minutes early because arriving early was a discipline he had maintained for 30 years. He got coffee from the counter and sat in a corner of the booth and waited. Came in at exactly the agreed time. He looked different from the man who had walked into the Broken Spur 4 days ago. The confidence was still there that was structural in Derek Voss, built too deep to disappear in 4 days, but it was sitting differently, positioned slightly differently, like furniture rearranged after a room has been disrupted. He had the look of a man who has been through something and is still in the process of deciding what it means. He sat down across from Cole. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Said, "You went to Kane." "Kane came to me," Cole said, "and then I went to Kane. And we reached this understanding." He looked at Derek steadily. "You know we did, because you were watching. And when you understood what the understanding was, you decided to keep running your own play." Jaw tightened. "Kane made a decision that was bad for the operation." "Kane made a decision that was right for Kane," Cole said, "which is the only kind of decision Kane makes. You know that." He paused. "What you're doing now, the threats, the surveillance, running collection pressure against the Broken Spur, without authorization, Kane doesn't know yet. He will." Another pause. "You want me to tell you what happens when Kane finds out one of his people has been running unauthorized operations that could blow back on an agreement he made?" Quiet. "You're not stupid," Cole said. "You know what happens." Something moved across Derek's face. Something complicated. The calculation of a man who has been running on pride and wounded ego and is now being forced to look at the actual arithmetic of his situation. "You humiliated me," Derek said. "It came out more raw than he probably intended. Honest. In front of my people. In front." He stopped. "No," Cole said. Derek looked at him, surprised slightly by the acknowledgement. "You walked in with 4 people and you walked out without what you came for, and with a story you couldn't control," Cole said. "Understand what that cost you. I'm not pretending it didn't happen." He paused. "But what you're doing now costs more. Roy Beckett's daughter didn't do anything to you. She's 20 years old and she's in college, and what you did was put fear into a man who's been a loyal customer of that bar for 11 years. Over something that had nothing to do with him." Cole kept his voice level. Not angry, but clear. "That's not strategy, that's desperation. And Kane is going to see it the same way." Derek's hands on the table were tight, thinking through something. Cole let him work through it. "This was the part that took patience. The part where you had made your case and the other person needed time to arrive at the conclusion themselves, because conclusions that people arrive at themselves hold in a way that conclusions they've been told don't." Cole had learned this 25 years ago, and it remained as true now as it had ever been. "What do you want from this conversation?" Derek said finally. "Roy Beckett's daughter gets left completely alone," Cole said. gets left alone. Anyone connected to the Broken Spur gets left alone. He paused. And you go back to Kane and you tell him that the Broken Spur situation is resolved, that you ran a secondary assessment and the cost-benefit doesn't support continued attention. You give Kane the reasoning that makes his agreement look like the right call rather than a weakness. You do that, and Kane's position is protected, and so is yours. Stared at him. You're giving me a way to save face. I'm giving you a way to survive the next conversation with your employer, Cole said. What you do with your face is your own business. Balance between them stretched. Cole reached into his pocket and set something on the table between them. A folded piece of paper. Derek looked at it without touching it. Roy Beckett's daughter's name is Sarah, Cole said. She's studying environmental science. She wants to work in conservation. He paused. It's on the paper. Her name, her major, the name of her advisor at the university. Another pause. I put it there so you understand that I know exactly who she is and exactly where she is, and that the distance between her and any action you take in the next 48 hours is considerably shorter than the distance between you and any consequence I could bring. He held Derek's gaze. Not a threat, a fact. I want you to have the complete picture. Looked at the paper for a long moment. He didn't touch it. She stays safe, Cole said. Roy stays safe. The Broken Spur stays what it is. And you go back to your job with a story that keeps you employed. He picked up the piece of paper and put it back in his pocket. That's everything I'm asking. Derek Voss sat across from Cole Harrison in a truck stop on Route 12, and he looked like a man who had arrived at something he hadn't expected to arrive at. You could have just gone to Kane, Derek said. Told him what I was doing. Ended me. Yes, Cole said. Why didn't you? Cole thought about how to answer that. Real answer, not the tactical one. Because you walked into that bar looking for a paycheck, Cole said. You were doing your job. You did it badly, but it was your job. It happened there, the way it went, that was a situation I created by being there. By being who I am. He paused. I don't think ruining your life with Kane is a proportionate response to a problem I'm partly responsible for creating. Was very still. That's a hell of a way to think about it, he said. Cole said. But it's how I think. Derek looked out the truck stop window at the highway. At the light on it, in the late afternoon, the particular Montana light that is like light nowhere else, wide and clean and carrying no mercy but carrying no malice either. Then he looked back at Cole. The girl stays safe, he said. It was not agreement with a condition. It was a statement of fact delivered in the register of someone who is taking responsibility for something rather than accepting terms, Cole said. And the bar stays the bar. Yes, nodded once. He started to stand, then stopped. Looked at Cole one more time with an expression that was difficult to read, not gratitude exactly, not respect exactly, but something in the vicinity of both that was complicated by everything else it had to coexist with. Listen, he said. Cole waited for what it's... Derek started again. The way you handled that room. Days ago, he paused. I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen anything like it. Cole held his gaze. Said nothing. Derek Voss walked out of the truck stop and back to his vehicle, and Cole watched him go. Then Cole sat with his coffee for another few minutes, alone in the corner booth. He sat with the quiet of it, particular quiet of a situation that has been brought through patience and care, and the willingness to see the person on the other side of a conflict as an actual person, to a resolution that didn't require anyone to be destroyed. He thought about what Derek had said, for what it's worth. He thought about whether it was worth anything. He thought about Frank in his clean shirt, and Emily studying at the bar, and Roy Beckett's hands shaking on the counter. He thought about Reese and 12 brothers who had come when he called. He thought about what it meant to be responsible for something. Not in the old sense, not the enforcement sense, not the protection through dominance sense, the quieter and harder and more complete sense of responsibility that was about showing up every day to a place and a set of people and deciding over and over again that they mattered enough to stay. He drove back to the Broken Spur. Frank was behind the bar when Cole came in. The early evening crowd was beginning to filter in regulars, the familiar faces, the people who came because this was the place they came to. Frank looked up. Well, he said. Cole hung his jacket on the hook behind the bar, rolled up his sleeves, picked up a glass. We're okay, he said. Studied him for a moment, the way he studied things when he was deciding whether the answer was complete. Then he turned back to the customer he had been serving and completed the pour with the practiced ease of 31 years. Cole moved to his end of the bar, a regular named Pete who drove a feed supply route and came in every Thursday and talked entirely too much about football, and whom Cole had come to regard with genuine affection without ever quite examining why. Slid onto a stool and said without preamble, "You hear about that game last night?" "Tell me about it," Cole said, and Pete told him about it, and Cole listened, and the evening continued in the way that evenings in the Broken Spur continued, with conversation and coffee and the steady rhythm of a place being what it was. Outside, Route 12 carried its traffic north and south. The sign above the parking lot creaked in the wind. Cole Harrison stood behind his bar and cleaned his glasses and listened to Pete talk about football and felt settling around him with the completeness of something genuinely earned. Particular piece of a man who is exactly where he has decided to be. Not a small thing. It was in fact the largest thing he had found in 50-some years of looking. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. And the thing that Reese had predicted, the watching, the testing, the patient application of Kane's particular brand of pressure, arrived exactly as described. Not in one dramatic event, in small things. A vehicle that sat on the highway's shoulder longer than made sense before moving on. A stranger who came into the bar, ordered water, said nothing, and left after 20 minutes. A phone call to the Broken Spur's landline that rang 4 times and disconnected when Frank answered. Cole tracked all of it. He noted the timing, the patterns, the intervals between incidents. He said nothing about most of it to Frank, because Frank had a bar to run and a life to live, and the operational details of what Cole was monitoring were not things that would help Frank do either of those things better. He tracked everything, the way he had always tracked everything, with the patient, comprehensive attention that had made him what he was in the first place. And then the small things stopped. They stopped on a Tuesday, in the 7th week, as cleanly and completely as if a switch had been thrown. The vehicle on the shoulder didn't appear. The stranger in the bar didn't come. The calls stopped. Cole noticed the absence the same morning it began. He stood behind his bar in the early quiet, before opening, coffee in hand, and he sat with the absence and turned it over carefully. Because the absence of Kane's testing was not the same thing as the absence of Kane, and confusing the two was the kind of mistake that had consequences. He called his contact in Billings. The conversation was 6 minutes long. When it ended, Cole set the phone on the bar and stood very still for a moment. Victor Kane had moved his expansion focus. Not abandoned it, Kane didn't abandon things. Redirected it. There was a corridor further east that had opened up. An opportunity that Kane's calculations apparently told him was more accessible and more profitable than continuing to press against a roadhouse protected by the ghost of a reputation he couldn't effectively counter. The Broken Spur was still on Kane's map, would probably always be on Kane's map. It had been deprioritized, moved down the list, flagged as a complication that exceeded its value for the foreseeable future. Foreseeable future. Cole understood what that meant and didn't mean. It meant the immediate threat had passed. It meant the daily vigilance could soften without disappearing. It did not mean permanent safety. Permanent safety was a fiction that he had stopped believing in long enough ago that he no longer mourned not believing in it. It meant something real. It meant the Broken Spur had held. It meant Frank's 31 years were intact. It meant Emily could study at the bar without the weight of what was hovering over the building pressing on every hour of her day. Cole picked up his coffee. He thought about how to tell Frank. He decided to tell him the truth, all of it, immediately, which was the only way he knew how to tell Frank anything. Frank listened without interrupting. He stood at the far end of the bar, and he listened to every word Cole said, and his face did what always did went. Still processed, came out the other side with whatever he had arrived at inside the quiet of his own thinking. When Cole finished, Frank was silent for almost a full minute. Then he said, "It's not over." "No," Cole said, "not permanently. The immediate pressure is gone. Kane has moved his focus. That buys us time, real time, not days. Months, maybe longer." Nodded slowly. "You did that," Frank said. "We did that," Cole said. "Stayed open, you kept the place running, you didn't fold." He paused. "That matters as much as anything I did." Frank looked at him with the expression, he sometimes got the expression, that meant he was seeing something he had known for a while, but was seeing more completely now. He didn't say anything. He picked up a cloth and began to wipe down the bar. And that, Cole had learned, Dalton's version of acceptance, version of yes. Emily arrived 40 minutes later. She came through the door and read the room. The way she always read a room in the first 3 seconds, completely, without appearing to. And she looked at Cole and she said, something happened. Something stopped happening, Cole said. He told her, less formally than he had told Frank. Because Emily received information differently than Frank, she wanted the logic of it, the sequence, the mechanism of cause and effect. And so Cole gave her the full picture, including the Billings contact, including the shift in Kane's focus, including what he thought it meant for the short term and what it didn't mean for the long term. Emily listened with her arms crossed and her head slightly tilted, which was the posture she took when she was running something through her understanding rather than just receiving it. Not safe, she said when he finished. We're safer, Cole said, which means the work is to stay safer, to keep being something that isn't worth the complication. That's it exactly, Cole said. Emily uncrossed her arms. She picked up her apron from behind the bar and tied it on with the brisk efficiency of someone who is done processing and is moving back into the work. She said, then let's open. They opened. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The regulars came in. The trucks came off the highway. And Pete talked about football. The coffee ran out twice, and Emily made 2 more pots, and Frank repaired a wobbly chair leg that had been wobbling for 6 weeks. And Cole cleaned glasses and served beer and listened to the particular ongoing narrative of other people's lives that he had come to understand, one of the finest privileges of the job. The day passed. It passed in the way that good days pass, not by being remarkable, but by being full of the unremarkable things that accumulate over time into a life that is actually being lived. And it was in the middle of that ordinary Tuesday, at about 3 in the afternoon, that the door opened and a woman came in that Cole did not recognize. She was in her mid-40s. She moved with the careful deliberateness of someone navigating an unfamiliar place, looking for something specific. She had a face that was familiar in the way that faces are sometimes familiar when you recognize what they carry rather than having seen them before. It was a face that had been through something and had not pretended otherwise and had arrived at a particular kind of honest steadiness on the other side of it. She sat down at the bar. Cole came over. What can I get you? She looked at him. Are you Cole Harrison? Cole went still. On the outside, he looked the same calm, open, attentive. But something in him became alert in the way it became alert when something unexpected entered the space. Who's asking, he said. My name is Sandra Voss, she said. Voss is my brother. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her, and kept one for himself. He leaned against the back counter. Talk, he said. Sandra Voss wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say and was now discovering that the rehearsal hadn't fully prepared her for the reality of saying it. My brother came home 2 weeks ago and he was different, she said. Obviously. Derek doesn't do obvious, but I know him. I've known him his whole life. She paused. He stopped drinking. She stopped. Regrouped. He told me he talked to you. He wouldn't tell me what you said or what happened, just that he talked to you. Another pause. He's been asking me questions. About going back to school, about whether it's too late to do something different. She looked at Cole directly. 32 years old. He's been doing what he does since he was 19. And he's asking about going back to school. Cole held her gaze. He said nothing. I don't know what you said to him, Sandra said. Know what happened at that meeting, or what you are to each other, or what this whole situation actually is. I won't explain it. He just says she stopped again. Hands tightened around the coffee cup. He says a man told him there was still a way out. He says he didn't believe it when he heard it, but he's been sitting with it, and he thinks maybe it's true. Cole looked at the counter for a moment, then back at her. Why did you come here? He said. Because Derek can't, Sandra said. He said coming back here himself isn't something he can do. Too complicated. But he wanted she reached into her jacket pocket and put an envelope on the bar between them. He wanted you to have this. Cole looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. He said you'd know what it is, Sandra said. He said you'd know whether it's enough. Cole picked up the envelope, opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. Names, addresses, dates, amounts. The internal structure of Derek's collection operation, his routes, his contacts, the businesses he had been running pressure on, the ones who had paid, and the ones who had refused. The information that would allow Cole to make specific calls to specific people and let them know that the pressure they had been under was gone, that they were free. The list included 6 businesses on Route 12 alone. Cole stood at his bar holding that piece of paper and felt something move through him that was large enough that he took a moment with it before he trusted himself to speak. Does he need anything? Cole said. Sandra looked at him. She had apparently expected a different first response to the paper. What? Your brother? Resources, contacts, something to actually make the change he's apparently considering. Sandra was quiet for a moment, genuinely surprised. He didn't ask for anything. I'm not asking what he asked for, Cole said. I'm asking what he needs. Sandra looked at Cole Harrison across the bar of the Broken Spur Roadhouse, and she looked like a woman who had come in carrying a specific errand and had found herself in the middle of something considerably larger than the errand. I don't know, she said honestly. I think mostly he needs to believe it's possible. Cole nodded. He reached under the bar and took out a small card, the kind of plain card that had nothing on it except a name and a number, the kind he kept specifically for certain conversations. He wrote something on the back of it and slid it across to Sandra. In Billings, he said. She runs a workforce transition program. She's worked with people coming out of situations like Derek's before. Judgment, just practical help. He paused. Tell him the call is optional. Tell him nobody is tracking whether he makes it or not. Tell him the option exists. Sandra picked up the card, looked up. Who are you? She said, not rudely. Open bewilderment. Cole almost smiled. The bartender, he said. Sandra Voss left 20 minutes later. She looked, walking out, like a woman who had arrived with a delivery and was leaving with something she hadn't expected to receive. Cole stood at the bar holding the list. Frank came out from the back and saw Cole's face and came directly to the bar without stopping. Showed him the paper. Frank read it slowly. His finger moved down the list of businesses. 12 locations, the names of people Cole didn't know, but Frank almost certainly did, because Frank had been on this highway for 31 years and knew everyone on it. Emerson's Diner, Frank said quietly. He's been paying for 4 months. He told me he was having trouble making rent, but he wouldn't say why. Cole folded the paper carefully. I'll start making calls this afternoon, Cole said. These people need to know. Frank put his hand on Cole's arm, not to stop him, just to put his hand there, the gesture of a man who is marking a moment because he understands it will matter later. Said, Cole waited. I'm going to say something, and I need you to just hear it, Frank said. You came in here 2 years ago, and you sat down and you ordered black coffee, and you said you were looking for work. Frank's voice was steady, but it had the roughness that it got when he was saying something from somewhere real. I hired you because something told me to. I didn't know what you were. I didn't know what you'd been. I just knew that something about you was right. He paused. These 2 years before any of this happened, you already made this place better. Made it safer, without me knowing it needed to be safer. You made it feel like something that would last. He stopped. His jaw worked briefly. I'm saying thank you. Not for what you did this week or last week. All of it, for being here. Cole held the old man's gaze. He was not someone who received things easily. He never had been. Whatever instinct most people had toward accepting care and gratitude, that instinct in Cole had been rerouted over decades into something else, into the giving end of the exchange, into the protective function, into the role of the person who took care of things so that others could receive care. Receiving had always been the harder direction. He received it now. He said, this is the best job I've ever had. Face did something that it rarely did. Open. Ian's just slightly turned. Just for a second, the face of a 67-year-old man who had built something and kept it standing and was now seeing fully that it was going to keep standing. Then it composed itself again, and Frank cleared his throat, and he went back to doing what Frank Dalton did, which was run his bar. Cole started making calls. He worked through the list methodically, the way he did everything systematically, without rushing, giving each call the full attention it required. He called Carl Emerson at the diner first, because Frank had said his name, and Frank, knowing the man, made it more immediate. Answered on the second ring, and Cole introduced himself and said simply that the situation that had been pressuring Carl's business was resolved, and that the payments Carl had been making were over, and that no one was going to contact him about this again. Long silence on Carl's end. Then Carl said, in a voice that was doing a great deal of work to remain controlled, how do you know about that? Because someone who was part of the situation decided to do the right thing, Cole said. You don't need to know more than that. Another silence. My wife doesn't know, Carl said. I didn't tell her. He stopped. I've been paying them for 4 months, and I told her the books were just tight. She's been helping more, picking up extra shifts at her other job. He stopped again. Cole waited, Carl said. It's over, Cole said. He heard Carl breathe. It was one of the most complete sounds he had ever heard. It's a man breathing on the other end of a phone, with the particular quality of air that had been held too long finally being released. Cole made 11 more calls that afternoon. Not all of them went like Carl's. Some of the business owners were guarded, skeptical, convinced this was another kind of trap. Cole was patient with all of them. He gave them what information they needed to believe him, and nothing beyond that. He asked for nothing. He offered the fact of their freedom and let them decide what to do with it. He finished the last call. It was evening and the bar was filling with the regular crowd, and Emily was moving through the floor with her order pad, and Frank was behind the bar, and the Broken Spur was being what it was. Pete had arrived at some point during the calls and was on his regular stool and had apparently been telling Frank about the game because Frank was nodding with the expression of a man who is listening to sports analysis he did not request but has decided is acceptable because it comes from Pete. Cole came out from the back and went behind the bar. Pete looked up. There he is. Cole, you hear about the game last night? Cole said, and Pete told him. Cole listened and cleaned glasses and poured drinks, and the evening moved through the bar the way evenings do, with warmth and noise and the specific unpredictable humanity of people gathered together in a place that has made itself worth gathering in. At 9 o'clock, in a brief quiet between the dinner rush and the late crowd, Emily leaned against the bar across from Cole with her arms folded and the expression she wore when she had been thinking about something for a while and had arrived somewhere with it. I got an email today, she said. Cole looked at her. I'm the business program. I applied for an accelerated track 6 weeks ago, I didn't tell you, because I wasn't sure I'd get in and I didn't want to. She paused. I got in. Cole set down the glass he was holding. 18 months, Emily said. If I do the accelerated track, I finish in 18 months instead of 3 years. She paused. It means I can't do full hours here. It's going to be hard. Cole looked at her steadily. What's the question? I don't have a question, Emily said. I just wanted to tell you. She paused. She stopped, looked at the bar surface briefly, looked back up. You're the reason I actually sent in the application. You didn't say anything. You didn't push me. But watching you choose something deliberately, watching you decide what you were going to be and then be it, it made me think that's what you're supposed to do. And then be it. Cole held her gaze. Emily Carter was 24 years old, and she was the kind of person who had been all along more than the job she was doing, and the job she was doing had been excellent, but it was never going to be everything she was. And the 18 months ahead of her were going to be hard in the specific way that building something real is always hard, which is the best kind of hard, because it is hard in the service of something that is actually yours. Emily, Cole said. Yeah, congratulations, she smiled. It was the real one, the one that started in her eyes and came out fully and made her look exactly her age, exactly herself, exactly the person she was when she wasn't managing a room or handling a difficult customer or being tougher than she needed to be. Frank's going to be impossible about the schedule change, she said. Is going to help you figure it out, Cole said. And he's going to tell everyone who comes in here for the next 6 months that his employee is in an accelerated business program. He's going to be insufferable about it, Emily said. Ads. Absolutely, Cole agreed. She pushed off the bar and went back to the floor, and Cole watched her go with the particular feeling of someone who has been present for the beginning of something. Then something happened that Cole had not anticipated. Opened. He looked up with the automatic scan. A moment, just a moment, what he saw didn't fully assemble into sense. The man who came through the door was in his late 50s. He moved carefully with a slight hitch in his gait that suggested an old injury managed over a long time. He wore plain clothes and had the kind of face that recorded everything and revealed nothing. And his eyes moved through the room with a specific professional quality that Cole recognized immediately and that caused something in his chest to tighten. The man came to the bar. He sat down. He looked at Cole. Cole Harrison, he said. That's right, Cole said. The man reached into his jacket and put something on the bar between them. Cole looked at it without touching it. Federal credentials. The kind with a specific department designation that Cole had enough history to identify immediately. His name is Agent Warren Taft, the man said. I've been working a case related to Victor Kane's operation for about 2 years. Cole was very still. We've been building something, Taft said. Slowly, the way you build cases against people like Kane carefully with documentation, with the kind of evidentiary foundation that holds in court. He paused. About 6 weeks ago, something happened in our case area that we noticed. A roadhouse on Route 12 had a confrontation with Kane's people. And then Kane's expansion pattern in that corridor shifted. In a way that our analysts flagged as significant, he looked at Cole, and then a week later, approximately 12 businesses along Route 12 stopped making irregular payments that our financial surveillance had been tracking, all within a 48-hour window. Cole said nothing. The list, Taft said. However, you got it whoever gave it to you. It connected to businesses we had already identified as part of Kane's collection network. The payment stopping gave us a documentation event that's going into our case. He paused. I'm not here to cause you trouble, Mr. Harrison. I'm here because what you did, whatever you did, however you did it, helped us. I have a question I need to ask. Cole waited. And who gave you that list? Taft said. Are they in a position where they might be willing to provide information to a federal investigation? Cole looked at Agent Taft for a long moment. He thought about Sandra Voss sitting at this bar with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. He thought about a 32-year-old man who had been in a specific kind of life since he was 19 and was now asking his sister about going back to school. He thought about the card he had written on and slid across the bar, the option that existed and that no one was tracking whether someone used. I can't answer that, Cole said. That's not my answer to give. Nodded slowly. Fair, he said. Can you pass something along? Considered. Depends what it is. Taft reached into his jacket again. Another card. He placed it on the bar. Just this. My direct number. A message that there's a conversation available that could significantly benefit whoever we're talking about. No commitment required. Just a conversation. Cole looked at the card. He picked it up. I'll think about it, he said. Taft studied him for a moment with the specific assessment of someone who has been reading people professionally for a long time. You know, he said, a man who's been off the radar for 7 years. You've had a remarkably impactful couple of months. I tend a bar, Cole said. Something crossed Taft's face that might have been the beginning of a smile. He said. He stood up. Thank you for your time, Mr. Cole watched him walk out. Then he looked at the card in his hand. He thought about Derek Voss asking his sister about school. He thought about what it meant to actually believe there was a way out versus just saying it. He thought about the card he had given Sandra, the workforce transition contact in Billings, and whether Derek had called it or was still sitting with it or had put it in a drawer somewhere and was looking at the drawer. He thought about the difference between a door being open and a person being able to see it. He pulled out his phone. He sent a message to a number he had gotten from Sandra Voss before she left, that Sandra had written on the back of a receipt and pushed across the bar almost as an afterthought. He typed 3 sentences. There is a federal agent named Taft who has been building a case against Kane. He says the conversation is available and no commitment is required. The option exists. He sent it. He set the phone on the bar. He did not know what Derek Voss would do with that information. He did not know if Derek would call Taft or burn the message or sit in the specific paralysis of a man who can see 2 directions and can't make himself move in either one. He did not know how the federal case would resolve or what role any of them might or might not play in it. He knew was that he had done what was in his hands to do. He had passed the information. He had kept the option open. What happened with the option was not his to control. This, too, was something he had learned. The difference between responsibility and control. Being responsible for your choices and your actions and what you passed on to people that was real and it mattered and it was heavy in the right way. Needing to control what other people did with what you gave them. That was a different thing, a thing that had costs, a thing he had spent too many years carrying without understanding the weight of it. He set it down. The bar was full now. The noise level had reached the particular comfortable pitch of a place that is doing what it is designed to do. Pete was on his 3rd beer and had moved from football to a nuanced analysis of whether his daughter's new boyfriend was actually okay or just seemed okay, and Frank was nodding, with the expression of a man who had opinions about this but was keeping them measured. And 2 ranchers at the corner table were arm wrestling in the way that the particular 2 ranchers always arm wrestled on Thursday nights. Technically it wasn't, but felt like it. And Emily was working the room, with the efficiency of someone who has already half left for the next version of her life and is honoring the current one fully in the meantime. Cole looked at all of it. He looked at it the way he sometimes looked at things when he wanted to register them completely, not passively, not as scenery, but the way you look at something when you want to be able to carry it with you accurately. Frank caught his eye from the other end of the bar, raised an eyebrow. The question in it was a frank question, which meant it contained more than it appeared to. It was asking about all of it, about the man who had just left, about the card Cole was still holding, about the general state of the situation, and the general state of Cole Harrison. Cole pocketed the card. He shook his head slightly. Not bad news. Just not tonight, Frank. Frank read it correctly, the way Frank read everything, and turned back to Pete, and the evening continued. At 11:30, after the last regular had gone, and Emily had cleaned her tables and said goodnight with the efficiency of a woman who had studying to do before bed, Cole and Frank closed down the Broken Spur the way they always did, side by side, wiping down the bar, stacking chairs, checking the locks, turning off the lights one by one, until only the counter light was on. They had done this together for 22 months. Cole had decided some time ago, one of his favorite parts of any day, put on his jacket at the back door. He paused with his hand on the light switch the way he sometimes paused, not theatrically, but genuinely, as if giving the moment its due. You know what my father told me, Frank said when he handed this place over? Cole waited. He said a bar is only as good as the person behind it. Frank looked at the room, at the bar, at the shelves, at the floor his father had laid beam by beam. I always thought that was about skill, about knowing your trade. He paused. Took me 30 years to understand he meant something else. He meant character. He meant who you are when things get hard. He looked at Cole. You've got it, whatever it is. You've got it in a way I've only seen a few times in my life. Said nothing for a moment. Then, Frank, go home. Get some sleep, Frank smiled. It was a good smile, the smile of a man who has arrived somewhere he intended to arrive at and knows it. Cole, night, Frank. Frank went out the back. Cole stood alone in the bar. He stood in the quiet of it for a long moment. Counterlight was warm, and the room was exactly what it was, the stools and the shelves, and the glasses lined up where he had put them, and the bar surface wiped clean and the chairs stacked, and everything in its place. The coffee was. He thought about what he had been before this. He thought about 25 years of different life, a life that had made him capable and hard and useful in ways that had cost him things he couldn't always name. He thought about the years after, the drifting years, the years of motion without destination, and to figure out who you are when you have taken away the context that defined you. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon when he had needed coffee and stopped at a roadside bar, and a man had looked at him with steady eyes and said, almost by accident, you got experience. And Cole had said some, and it had been the most honest thing he had said in years. He thought about Frank on the floor of his own bar, Emily's arm held by a man with no right to hold it, Beckett's hands shaking on the counter, Carl Emerson's wife picking up extra shifts because her husband couldn't tell her the truth. He thought about 12 brothers riding out of the dark. He thought about Derek Voss saying you're a different kind of person than you look like. He thought about a federal agent who said impactful. He thought about Emily getting into an accelerated program. He thought about Reese saying, it's you, Cole, before I finished the sentence. Every one of them said yes. And he thought about what it meant, what it actually meant, not in the abstract, but in the concrete and specific reality of this particular life, in this particular place, to be a man who had once carried one of the most feared reputations in a world that did not give out such reputations lightly, and who had set that reputation down and walked away from it and built something completely different from it, and then been forced to use every single thing that reputation had made him in order to protect the something completely different. He had not lost what he was. He had found out what it was for. That was the thing. That was the thing he had been missing. In the drifting years and the trying years, and the years of convincing himself that quiet was enough when really what he had wanted was not quiet but purpose. Not absence but direction. Not the end of being Cole Harrison, but the beginning of knowing what Cole Harrison was actually for. He turned off the counter light. He walked out the back of the Broken Spur Roadhouse and into the Montana night. And he stood for a moment with the sound of the highway and the smell of the air and the particular quality of the dark out here that was different from any other dark, that had a depth to it that made you feel both very small and very real at the same time. He stood there. He was the bartender at a roadside bar on Route 12 in Montana. He was the man who had once been the most trusted enforcer in a brotherhood of dove men who understood what it meant to stand between the vulnerable and the violent. He was the man who had spent 25 years learning how to protect people and then spent 7 years learning how to among them, and had finally, in a small bar held together by stubbornness and loyalty, understood that those two things were not different things at all. He was Cole Harrison. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He went inside. Tomorrow the bar would open at 7, would come in at 6:45 with his coffee and his clean shirt. Emily would come in at 7 with her own travel mug and her textbook and her future arranged in the order she had decided it needed to be arranged. Pete would come in at some point and talk about football, and Cole would listen and mean it. The regulars would come, the truckers would come. Highway would carry people back and forth through the Montana distance the way it always had, and some of them would stop, and some of those would need something, and Cole Harrison would be behind the bar and capable, and exactly what the moment required that was enough. It turned out everything. And no one, not Kane, not Derek, not any of the forces that had moved against the Broken Spur and found something immovable in their path, had been able to take one single thing from it. And Spur stood. Cole Harrison stood with it. That was not a small thing. That was the whole story.